Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Fanfiction podcast. I'm so excited to have you here. Today, we're diving into a brand new story, The White-Winged Devil Part 2 by Nanokui. Before we jump in, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think. Chapter 7. Bell gasped as he took a seat against a stone rampart up on Arario's defensive wall. It had been a fortnight since Aquino had begun training him in secret, and even if it was downright torturous, it was beginning to show results. The queen in question smiled down at him as she took out a water skin and passed it over to him. Small sips, as you well know. He pouted up at her as he took the skin and took a small gulp of water. His training had been strange. That was the only way he could describe it. Even becoming level 2 didn't manage to help him much when it came to fighting the level 5 Aquino. The gap in their power had been demonstrated in their first session, when she'd forgotten to hold back. He'd been out like a light, faster than falling asleep, and he hadn't even had a chance to hit her as she danced around him while chanting. Casting his mind back, he remembered the day he'd ascended to level 2. All of them had congratulated him on the achievement, but none more so than Ria's. She seemed overly clingy, and while Belle did enjoy the attention, it was worrying. Had she given up already? There was no way. She was his mistress, the cool, collected and smart mistress he'd come to admire. Belle had even chosen his developmental ability on her say-so, the undocumented skill, luck. None of them knew what it would do, but Belle had a sneaking suspicion that it was just what he needed. The other ability that had appeared, the skill Argonaut, had also been an embarrassing surprise. The three had teased him endlessly about it, but Belle still didn't entirely know what the skill did. He'd put it out of his mind since he couldn't figure it out, and instead focused on Aquino's training while continuing to work on the 14th floor with Lily. She'd taught him the 3 main ways of countering a magic caster, but he only had one option when it came down to it. Cast faster, make casting unfeasible, or interrupt their chant. Firebolt was fast, but it wasn't fast enough to hit Aquino when she was aware of it. Making casting unfeasible was a no-go either. She had enough support to keep Belle occupied as she casted. Finally, interrupting the cast. It wouldn't be easy since she was probably trained for what Aquino called concurrent chanting, but if he could hit her mouth at least, it would cause an explosion brought on by the effects of Ignis Fatuus. And so here he was, standing up on the walls as evening approached with Aquino, trying to land a hit on her. He could tell he was getting faster, and Aquino knew so too, judging from the twitching of Ria's eye after every stat up, but it still wasn't enough to catch up with a level 5. Taking down his water skin, he spluttered when he saw another 2 figures standing in front of him. It was Ais and Tiona. Aquino spoke up first as the 2 girls looked down at Belle while he tried to recover from the display. "Oh, what brings Loki familiar up here?" Ais didn't move her gaze as Tiona turned to her with a big grin. "Hey, fallen angel. We just got back from our expedition and followed Argonaut's trail. Speaking of which, what was that fight? You were so cool, Argo." Belle blinked in surprise at the name of his skill before asking curiously. "Argonaut. Like, the Argonaut. That's a little." He was stopped from whatever he was going to say as Ais patted his head, giving him a rare smile. "You did. Good. Well done." "Oh great." And now his wings were flapping excitedly. Tiona broke down into laughs as Aquino covered her mouth and turned away, evidently just as amused. Eventually they sobered up and Aquino explained smoothly, careful not to give too much away. "I'm training Belle here to counter magic casters. Never know when he might have to deal with one." Tiona spoke up sympathetically. "Oh, you're expecting a fight soon. Man, sucks to be you." Aquino raised her eyebrow before Tiona grinned and leaned up against the wall next to Belle. "Oh come on, it's pretty obvious." Loki was talking up some marriage between Ria's Gremory and some highborn devil, was pretty happy about it too. Belle was suddenly on guard before Ais shook her head and said, "We're not going to stop you." There was a long moment of silence before Belle asked nervously, Miss Ais, how did you get so strong?" A level 6 wasn't exactly what you'd call a weak person after all. If he had any chance at helping his mistress, it would be from learning and training with the best. Ais tilted her head before replying in a monotone. "Practice." Tiona sighed in exasperation as Belle's sweat dropped. What she means to say is that she wants to become the best, so she does. It's as simple as that. "What's your goal then, Argo? Though if I think about it, you've already killed the Minotaur, so." Belle smiled back at her excitedly. "Save the princess." The Amazoness gaped before turning to him with a sparkle in her eyes. "You know the story." Belle nodded excitedly as AIS frowned and took a step away as the two began to geek out over the myth. While she'd known that Tiona had some strange tastes, she hadn't expected them to be the same as Belle's, and certainly not that they'd get along so well. Aquino walked over to her and gave her a look. "Wallenstein, would you? No, may I ask for your help?" AIS looked up at the girl in shock. She'd remembered Aquino from when she was a child, and she had never expected the legendary mage to ever ask her for help, especially after she'd retired. She'd never had the same experiences with Ria's Gremory's peerage that the other executives in the Familia had, so she never quite understood the bad blood between them. "How?" Aquino crossed her arms under her bust as she sighed and explained. "Belle's good, but he needs an agility-based fighter to teach him further. I'm still just a mage at the end of the day, even with my level." AIS blinked before nodding. This was an opportunity to spend more time with the enigmatic boy who had set her familiar's hearts on fire that day in the dungeons. Even Beat had begun storming ahead after watching the inspiring display, and she'd overheard Finn say that Belle had indirectly made their expedition that much stronger by boosting morale. "Okay." Tiona suddenly turned from where she'd been chatting with Belle excitedly before asking, "Ooh, you're training him. Let me help." That was when the young knight caught up with the conversation and blinked in surprise. "Wait, training me?" AIS nodded as Aquino explained. "Rias has been getting suspicious with my leaves, so I'll leave it to these two. Girls, please, don't hold any punches. And make sure this doesn't reach Rias. She'll act rashly if it does." Tiona waved her off, almost buzzing at the idea of training the boy as AIS nodded with a smile. Belle stood there nervously, wondering what they were going to do as they discussed it before Tiona clapped her hand and said with a grin, "All right. I think I know what to do. AIS, you go first, I'll be right back." "Oh, Belle, don't expect to get much sleep tonight." How prophetic that had been. By the time he'd returned, the sun had come up and Rias was furious. It had been a chore trying to convince her that he'd just been roped into a drinking contest at the Hostess of Fertility, though Lily seemed less convinced than Rias had been, but it had worked for the most part. Tiona had reluctantly agreed that if they wanted to keep the training a secret, then he'd need to be back in a good time. Splitting his attention between the dungeon, training, and the incoming deadline was playing hell on Belle's stress. Lily had noticed that he was getting sloppier in the dungeon despite his improvements, and SYR had even voiced her concern when he'd picked up his lunch. Belle had pushed himself even farther than he had been under Aquino's tutelage, but he somehow found himself arriving to training even after getting injured in the dungeon. AIS was a taskmaster, and even a week of training hadn't made it any easier. Tiona had thankfully been a bit more understanding, instead teaching him how to keep momentum up in a fight while AIS taught him how to exploit mistakes. That was where he found himself, sailing through the air as he was kicked in the chest after hitting the girl in the side of the face with his knife. Belle groaned as he tried to get to his feet, reeling from the hit as AIS blinked and held a hand to her face to where there should have been a cut. Tiona also noticed the anomaly and said worriedly, Argonaut, is that knife sharpened right? That should have at least drawn blood." "Right." The Amazoness walked over and picked up the knife from where it had been thrown and held the point to the tip of her finger and blinked in surprise. "It's not even drawing blood with the point." "What?" Belle stood up as he remembered what Rias had told him about the knife. Oh, that's because it's a magic knife." He took the blade and poked it into his finger, wincing as it drew a small well of blood while Tiona looked down at it in surprise. It won't cut anyone, It's a little hard to explain." Suddenly she seemed to get an idea as she grinned up at him with a knowing smirk as AIS tilted her head curiously. "Come on, Argo, spit it out." Belle turned his head as he muttered in embarrassment. It won't cut people I consider friends." Tiona blinked before sighing in defeat and throwing her arm around his shoulder, giving him a wide smile. "That's a pretty weird effect, but thanks. Though I've never heard of a magic sword like that. Sure that's all?" He looked at her curiously as Tiona explained. "If it's a magic sword, surely it'll have some kind of magic it can fire off, right? Even if it's a cursed item, it'll still do something if it cuts someone. Noticed anything when fighting a monster? Does it slow down or get weaker?" Belle shook his head in worry before Tiona grinned and slapped him on the back. "Even better then, it'll probably be something to fight people. I mean, since we're buddies, you can't test it on us and I doubt anybody'll be willing to get stabbed by a knife to see what it can do." The boy sighed in defeat before AIS spoke up curiously, looking down at the knife. Belle considered her a friend. Was that all? The idea made her feel a little uneasy. She'd hoped she'd be more special as his senior. We could appraise it. Tiona blinked at her comrade, speaking up before nodding. That'll be the best bet. I think Hefeisto's familia'll be able to figure it out, though they are pricey. And I'm still in debt to Goibnu Familia for my poor Urga. Suddenly Bell remembered where he'd found his first replacement knife and offered. I know a gnome pawnshop owner, and maybe he'll know. Tiona replied with a grin. All right, you head over there now and see if he can't figure it out. Gnomes are fairy people after all. They are better at magic than us Amazons. Just be careful, all right. Bell nodded as he was left, walking down the perilous steps down into Rio as a pair of invisible eyes watched from afar. One Asfi ul Andromeda jumped down from the rooftop she was surveying the event from and landed next to a man in a feathered hat, pulling off the mask that made her invisible. Bell Cranel has left those two for the day. It looks like he's going to go and get his knife appraised, as they believe it is a curse weapon. Lord Hermes, why are we doing this instead of going straight to Rhea's Gremory? Hermes, the messenger of the gods, sighed in mock exasperation as he explained patronizingly. Because our client doesn't want him to know he's alive, otherwise he'd just go himself. Now then, the reports from Lulun tell us that the Phoenix family is trying to push through the marriage contract and the Gremories are considering it. What to do, what to do. Asfi, if you were in poor little Rhea's situation, what would you do? The captain of the Hermes Familia sighed at her god's usual scheming and replied dutifully. Two options, fight or capitulate. If Cranel is training in secret with children from a rival familia, then it's likely that Rhea's Gremory hasn't sanctioned the training or doesn't know in the first place. If she hasn't sanctioned the training, then it would be more likely that she'd substitute a trainer, such as Koneko Tuju. Since we've not observed anything of the sort, it's likely that he's doing it behind her back. This means that she hasn't told him about the marriage from hesitation or possibly that she's planning on capitulating to avoid having her peerage fight raise of phoenixes out of concern for their safety. Hermes laughed and patted her on the shoulder. 10 out of 10, my dear Asfi, you're entirely right. Now, what to do with this information? Asfi frowned as her god began to plot something for the young boy. Over the week that she'd been observing him, she'd begun to have a mild respect for his dedication to his mistress, though she was well aware that he was weak compared to the devils under Raisa's command. Her god had a bad habit of thinking of Gakkai as his stage, and he was the director, and she could only assume that the god had a plan in place for the devil raised by this mysterious benefactor that could get Hermes to do a job for him personally. The next day Bell groaned as he woke up, his 7 hours of sleep being all he could afford to get. Thankfully, he was a devil, and they generally required less to work at the top of their game, but it was still unpleasant. Standing up, he was surprised when suddenly Lily walked into the room holding 2 cloaks. Master Bell, I wanted to talk to you before we made for the dungeon today. He was a bit worried by that. He'd kept what he'd been doing from Lily, not sure if he could do what Aquino had done and go behind his mistress back. He'd managed to play off his tiredness by telling her that he was training for the middle floors, but even that wouldn't hold up forever. The prum walked over and passed him over a cloak, and Bell could tell there was something odd about it. This is salamander wool, a useful thing to have if we want to go down into the middle floors. I would like to go down there today. Bell blinked in surprise before Lily said with a grin. I think you're good enough for the middle floors, Master Bell, and it's not like we can stay on the upper levels forever. We can find a new party member soon, but I think it's important we make a start. That was true. He couldn't stay where he was forever. But between his sluggishness from the training and the upcoming fight he was worrying about, he didn't know if it was a good idea. Lily, I do agree that we need to start going lower, but... Well, before he could continue, the door opened again, revealing Rhea's. Her face was implacable, but Bell could tell that something was wrong. Good morning, you two. Lily, I think that is a good idea. You're more than capable of going down to the middle floors by now, Bell. He nodded before Rhea's motioned for him to turn around. Hey, I'll do a stat up. That was really odd. Normally she'd still be asleep at this hour before they left. Why would she be awake now? And she wasn't dressed in her usual clothes either. Are you going somewhere today? He had turned around, so he couldn't see the sad smile on her face, but Lily could, and her eyes widened. It hadn't been hard to figure out that she and Aquino had fallen out over something out, but this was more severe than she'd expected. Rhea's did the rest of the stat up and took it off Bell's back before pulling him into a hug from behind and whispering, Good luck. The girl stood up and turned to Lily with a regretful smile. Take care of Bell, okay? He's too much of a knucklehead to know what he's getting himself into. Lily nodded silently as Riaz walked away, and the two shared a worried look before Lily shook her head and said resolutely, "Miss Riaz isn't dumb. She knows what she's doing, right? In any case, it's not something we should interfere with. Come on, let's get going, Master Bell." That didn't settle him, but Bell got dressed and followed the girl out of the house. Aquino was still asleep, judging from her locked door, but he tried to push it out of his mind. Arriving at the dungeon, Bell followed Lily down the beaten track until they found themselves in the middle floors. Lily and Aina had warned him that the middle floors were a big change from the upper floors. The layout changed, and the dungeon started to play less fair by sending out larger sums of monsters at a time. Thankfully, Bell had been trained by the strongest in the business, and he had found that Aquino's training in closing the gap proved irreplaceable in killing hellhounds before they could harm him. Still, he was immensely grateful for the salamander wool that gave a fireproof barrier between himself and the heat of the hellhound's breath. By the time they decided it was time to return, what happened in the morning had yet to leave his mind. By the time they'd showered and left Babel, it was still festering. Just as Bell and Lily were walking outside, he was suddenly greeted by an unfamiliar man and a woman with glasses and blue hair. "Ah, you must be Bell Cranel. Please, give my congratulations to your mistress on the wedding." "Oh, apologies for my rudeness." "Hermes, messenger god at your service." Bell's heart stalled and Asfi had to suppress a wince. He looked like his world was collapsing in on itself, and even she wasn't made of stone. What? Hermes gave him an innocent, curious tilt of the head, but Asfi could recognize that he was shoving the boy onto his stage, ready or not. "You didn't hear?" Ria's Gremory apparently decided to accept a marriage contract. "I'm surprised. I'd have thought you'd have heard the news. The wedding is tonight after all." As if summoned by magic, Aquino suddenly appeared, racing towards Bell and skidding to a halt. She stopped next to him and she was gasping for breath. "Bell, she's. Oh hell below, how did she find out? And why is she activating it?" Bell gulped, wondering if he'd done anything to let his mistress know of his training. Before he could reply, Tiona appeared, waving as she shouted, "Argonaut, you've got to go. You've heard the news, right?" He nodded and Aquino gritted her teeth, knowing that they were being watched as Lily tried to keep up. "Look, Hirayut, this isn't. What do we do now? She's accepted the marriage for one reason or another. There's no chance of her declaring a rating game. That idiotic." They were stood there for a long moment before Hermes clapped his hands together and said as he began to leave, "Well, I believe I'll leave you three to it. Oh, might I say, that Razor Phoenix has never declined a challenge. From anyone." Aquino's eyes widened in shock before her and Tiona shared a look before the Amazoness said excitedly, "Hey, can you get him to where this Phoenix guy is?" She crossed her arms before replying worriedly, "Bell, we don't have much time. Are you willing to put your life on the line?" Lily's eyes widened in shock as Bell nodded his head resolutely. "Master Bell, what are you agreeing to?" He grinned down at her before repeating the words he'd said to her when he'd saved her. "I'm greedy, Lily. I don't want to let go of mistress." Aquino smiled at the sentiment before nodding to Tiona. "All right, I can get us to the underworld, but this is going to be a challenge. Bell, you have an hour to prepare yourself. Lily, get him rested. Hirayut, follow me. We meet at the peerage house then." The two walked away as Lily turned to Bell with a furious expression. "Master Bell, you'd better explain yourself once this is all over." He nodded in apology as they began running all over Orario. He spent a good 20,000 Valis on a high double potion from Mayak Familia, and even the god himself made an appearance as Naza fetched the potion from the storeroom. His armor was fine, and they were sat having a light meal in the hostess of fertility. It was a quiet night for them, and Syr sat down with the two when she noticed his troubled expression. "Bell, what's wrong?" The boy looked up at her with a small smile. Oh, Syr. Could I ask you a question?" The waitress' expression shifted as she nodded, though Bell couldn't tell. If you had to choose between doing what you think is right and what your mistress thinks is right, what would you do?" Syr was about to reply before another voice spoke from behind him, and Bell turned in surprise to see Liu standing behind him. Her expression was implacable as she said softly, "Mr. Cranel, I assume this is to do with the Gremory marriage." He nodded silently as Lily watched with a careful eye. She absolutely hated the idea of Bell putting himself in danger for his mistress' sake, but she couldn't help but remember that it was exactly what he had done for her. The elf sat down next to him and said in a quiet voice, "You love your mistress, that's obvious. The only thing you can do is what you feel is right, and the consequences can be considered later. Bell whispered as he heard the elf's words, and they rung particularly true. The only shameful thing a man can do is be indecisive. With a jolt, he suddenly felt conviction spread throughout him. There wasn't any time to be worried. He was a knight. It was time to act like one. Before the elf could stop him, Belle grabbed her hands and said with a grateful smile, "Thanks, Liu. You're the best." The girl felt a small rush of blood to her cheeks as Belle stood up, dropped some coin on the table as he exclaimed to Lily with a confident grin, "Let's go, Lily." He began to march out of the tavern before Mia called out from the bar, a nostalgic smile on her face. "Oi, kid." Belle turned back with a grin, and the dwarfess said with a thumbs up, "Once you win, come back and spend loads, okay?" The young devil gave her a thumbs up in turn before dashing out of the tavern, Lily running after him shouting indignantly. Mia sighed with a smile as Syr walked over to sit up at the bar, a small smile on her face. "He is so beautiful, don't you think so too, Mia? You can see it too." The dwarfess sighed and nodded, replying as she thought of the boy's bittersweet fate. Such devotion to his mistress, it rivals Alan's, perhaps even Otter's. "I just hope he'll be able to devote himself to you too, goddess." Scene change. Belle waited in Ria's office as Aquino and Tiona walked in. Lily was sitting on one of the couches, but Belle was standing there in his armor, a hint of red peeking out from under it. Aquino was surprised at the look in Belle's eyes. It was a far cry from the despair not an hour ago. Mentally sending her thanks to the person responsible, she began seriously. "All right, Belle, this is a long shot, but you're the only person available for this. Grafia." Suddenly a portal opened next to Belle and he turned to see a woman he'd never seen before walk through. She had gray hair and a mysterious look about her, and he could tell that she was incredibly powerful just from her aura. Aquino nodded to her before introducing them. "Everyone, Grafia Lucifuge, the wife of Surzek's Gremory and maid of the Gremory household. Grafia, please, explain the plan to Belle." The woman turned to Belle and looked him up and down, but he stood his ground resolutely. There was no chance he'd be able to save Riaz if he cowered just at the gaze of someone strong. "Belle Cranel, a pleasure." As is devil custom, an interested party can declare a duel against another. There is an old form of duel known as a suitor's gambit, initiated only when a marriage contract is to be fulfilled. A potential groom declares that he has a greater right to the bride, and the challenged groom is expected to defeat the other in a duel to prove that he is the most suitable candidate. To be frank, I only do this because Surzek has asked me to help you. However, I acknowledge that Miss Riaz has been hasty in her early activation of the marriage contract. Belle nodded, not entirely sure about the wording of the duel, but he got the gist of it. "So, if I beat this guy, Mistress is released from her contract." Grafia had a small smile as she replied, knowing that he hadn't picked up on the finer details. "In a manner. Now, shall we go? Are you prepared?" The look in his eye told her everything she needed to know, and another portal opened behind her and she motioned for them to follow. Belle looked at the swirling mass for a long moment before nodding resolutely as Aquino, Tiona, and Lily walked up to join them. Tiona nudged him in the side and said with a grin, "You'd better not make AIS and I look bad. You got it, Argonaut." He nodded back with a similar smile, and Tiona had to admit, he looked particularly handsome in that moment. His confidence, stride, and most of all those white wings that had captivated her all seemed to glow. Without another word, they walked through the portal as Lily held onto Belle's sleeve, worried as she gazed at the magical transport. They walked through it and Belle felt as if he'd stepped into a particularly dense fog for a moment before he opened his eyes, revealing a large ornate door. The entire house felt magical, and it had a gaudy aristocracy about it as Grafia stepped away. "This is as far as I go. And Cranel, don't disappoint me." Grafia disappeared into another portal as Belle took a steadying breath. This was it, now or never. Kicking down the door without consulting the others, Tiona shouted excitedly as the others looked at her in shock. "We object." Chapter 8. The astonished party of high-class devils all turned to the commotion as Tiona made her grand entrance, and Belle cleared his throat as he called out in a confidence that belied his fear. "Rise a phoenix. I challenge you to a duel." A path cleared in the devils, and Belle was left with a straight line towards a blonde man in a suit, and Belle gulped when he saw his mistress standing next to him. She was in a bridal dress, and Belle could tell that she wasn't pleased to see him. Before she could reply, Riza turned to her with an amused expression on his face, though there was a perverse glee in his eyes. "Your final bid, my sweet. I'll need to punish you for that, you know." Ria's expression turned fearful as Belle suddenly gained a newfound hatred of the man. As much as he had heard of the person that was Riza Phoenix, he hadn't seen the man until now, and it was a disgustingly horrible wake-up call to the reality of the situation. If he didn't win now, then it wouldn't just be losing his mistress. It would be subjecting her to him for the rest of her life. I'm here of my own accord, Phoenix. Do you accept, or do you have to let your parents find a match for you? The man suddenly turned back to Belle with a loathing snarl. Every devil at the party was beginning to mutter in shock at the accusation as Riza began to stalk towards him. You little shit. Fine, if you wish to die, then I shall oblige you. A man standing next to Riaz with the same crimson hair she had said aloud with a smile and a clap. Oh, a duel. Now this is a change of pace. As the great Satan Lucifer, I sanction the duel. Belle's eyes never left the burning red of razors as a man who resembled the man called out. All right then, Sirzex, as Lord Phoenix, I also sanction this duel. Everyone, to the Colosseum. The party began chattering excitedly as Riaz tried to shout over the commotion to her brother, desperately trying to keep him from allowing the duel. Meanwhile, as Belle began to follow a maid who had come to lead him to the Colosseum, he suddenly locked eyes with Sirzex. There was an unspoken message in his eyes, but Belle got the idea. He was rooting for him. Arriving in the arena, Belle watched as Riza Phoenix walked out of the other gate, now in combat armor and no weapon in hand. So, he was a caster, just what he was trained for, but Belle didn't let himself get cocky. Koneko had warned him about that, however indirectly, and he could tell from the heat coming off his opponent that he had serious magical abilities. Well then, little rabbit, shall we get this done? I have something to attend to, if you catch my drift. Belle saw red, but he didn't allow himself to be caught in a rage. This wasn't the time he foolishly ran at the Minotaur to save Lily. No, he needed to have a calculated approach. Riza was apparently unhappy at the response from the boy and scoffed, sending out a fast flash of fire at Belle. It was like his own, but it was slower and easier to dodge. Sending back his own, it seemed to catch Riza by surprise before he laughed and let it hit him. A few seconds passed, and Belle began to wonder if that had done it before he gritted his teeth. Riza was standing there, his face ablaze as the fire slowly receded. It wasn't a pretty sight, but the skin was regenerating in the flame as he said in amusement. What cool flames you have there, rabbit. Can't handle the heat. I am a member of the Phoenix clan, descendants of the Phoenix itself. No fire will harm me, and my wounds heal faster than you can make them. I am immortal, you hear me? None are more deserving of Ria's gremory than I. Belle gritted his teeth before taking in the information. This wasn't going to work. If he charged, then he'd get destroyed. If he cast from a distance, then it was going to be useless. Riza suddenly sent out 3 fireballs and Belle jumped away, his wings flaring to allow him some airtime before he dove for the ground as another one sailed by his hair, scorching it slightly. It was endless, constant, and Belle wondered how long his luck would last as the pyromaniac cackled in glee. The dance went on for a few minutes, and Belle noticed a pattern starting to form in his attacks. He was speeding up, but his accuracy was going down, and from the few glances he could get in on the devil's face, he was starting to get angry. Up in the stands, Riaz was stomping over towards Aquino, holding the constrictive dress that she hated more than anything up so that she wouldn't step on it. Tiona was cheering and clapping for Belle happily as Riaz shouted in anger, scaring the other spectators around her. Aquino, you bitch, what were you thinking? Aquino suddenly gained a small anger in her eyes as she turned to her friend. It had been a trying month, getting Belle ready while listening to Riaz bemoan a solution that she didn't think existed. I could say the same thing, mistress. Do you know just how crushed Belle was when he found out? Riaz gritted her teeth as she screamed back. He wasn't supposed to know. He's a boy for Satan's sake. What possessed you to get him involved? Before Aquino could reply with her own anger, Lily spat spitefully. Oh, like it was only you who was going to suffer. Both of them turned in shock. The little prom they had been hosting had been nothing but respectful in her time with them, and this hatred seemed out of place coming from her. Riaz whispered back, not entirely sure how she should handle the sudden animosity. What do you mean? Lily didn't take her eyes off Belle as he bounced around Razor's attacks. You're an idiot. Didn't he ever tell you about his grandfather? You take him in, feed him, nourish him, give him the strength to become a hero, and then you plan to leave again without a word. Ria's voice caught in her throat as Lily continued viciously. You're pathetic, even more pathetic than the Lily that Master Bell saved out of kindness. He relies on you, and you gave up the moment you find out that he actually wants to help you for once. Throw aside your pride for a second and think about what he was thinking. She swallowed her sorrow for a second and muttered, He has a Aquino, you A&W Wallenstein. He doesn't dash. Lily turned to her with a furious expression. What do you not get? You aren't us, and Master Bell doesn't want you to up and leave like his grandfather. He wants you, you idiotic, overly spoilt princess. You don't get to give him another life and then leave without a word. Riaz didn't know when the tears had begun, but they had started to hit her pristine white dress. She suddenly realized their presence when she realized that her breathing had begun shaky, and she was beginning to let out small hiccups. What do I? Oh, Belle. After a few seconds, she wiped the tears from her eyes only to realize that they were replaced in an instant. Gulping, she asked Lily, looking younger than the prom ever did as she sought answers. What do I do? How do I make it up to him? It wasn't Lily who answered him, but instead Tiona. She wasn't even addressing the girl, but a particularly loud cheer cut through her mind. Go Argonaut. Show that flaming chicken what's what. Riaz gulped as Lily nodded her head towards the railing that Tiona was leaning on and nodded, wiping the tears from her eyes once more only to see that they had begun to abate. She rushed over to the fence, leaned over and screamed with all the air in her lungs. Belle, please, win. Back in the pit, Belle heard his mistress cry and a sudden calmness overcame him. It appeared as if Razor was feeling the opposite effect as he screamed in anger, a large cloud of heat haze overcoming the devil as even his armor began to slough away, more and more red cloth being shown underneath. I'll show that bitch what name she should be screaming, Rise of Phoenix. Now die, you meddling rabbit bastard. Hellfire. A nova of heat suddenly overcame Belle as he threw out his final trump card just before the flames engulfed him. The entire crowd went berserk as they tried to shield their faces from the heat, though the fire itself was confined to the arena. Sand melted into liquid glass, and Riaz never stopped cheering through the sound of the crackling flames, constantly begging Belle to win as did Tiona. The attack lasted for a good 5 minutes before the fire began to sputter out. The smoke began to clear, and Razor was revealed first. He looked exhausted, a bright red tone covering his skin as his demonic energy tried to heal him. Turning up to the crowd, he said with a maniacal grin, You see, I am immortal. No reincarnated devil could defeat me. There was a short murmur in the crowd before a sudden noise covered the arena. It was loud, booming, yet gentle. The turning of a page. The dust cleared as a gust of wind overcame the stadium, and everybody was shocked to see not the charred remains of the foolish boy who had challenged the groom, but a cloth. Red, and sparkling as small flames extinguished without burning the piece itself. It fell away as a boy stood up, a nova of white light crackling around him as he stared down Riser as the man began to step away. And no, that's not fair. That's not fair. Belle's eyes were narrow as he began, raising his hand as he said vindictively, Rise of Phoenix, you don't deserve my mistress. Firebolt. The light exploded as the spell sailed towards Razor, white hot and crackling with red lightning. It hit the man square on, but Riaz muttered in horror. And no, it's not enough. He's resistant to fire. Why isn't he? Tiona's voice cut through her worry as the Amazoness looked down at the fight with wide eyes. No way is that all he has in store. Because his dash, she was cut off as a fast form burst forward towards the distracted Razor, and a glint of steel flashed in the light of the firebolt. The entire stadium went silent as Belle sunk the Nephilim's tooth into Riser's abdomen, and as he pulled the knife out, Belle flicked away the burning blood as Razor clutched his stomach. Why isn't it healing? Because it's too damn cool. Riaz gaped as Riser began to scream in fear only to be met with the silence of the crowd and Belle's hateful eyes. Tiona explained with a grin. Belle got that knife appraised, the Nephilim's tooth. It converts demonic energy into divine and vice versa. Not useful against monsters, but when a devil relies on demonic energy to heal. The redhead put her hands to her mouth as Aquino began softly while Belle raised his knife to the crowd. Riaz, he's a hero, and you told him he could be one. The least you could do is be his princess. Surzex called out from the stands, his voice booming like an excitable child. Belle Cranel is the victor. Suddenly the crowd erupted in cheers as Riaz broke down in a mixture of laughs and sobbed. Before anybody could stop him, Belle fell onto his back and Riaz jumped over the railing, gliding down to him as her wings ripped through her dress. Kneeling beside him, she lifted him up into a clenching hug as she sobbed. Why, you idiot? Belle didn't have the energy to reciprocate the hug as he muttered tiredly. Sorry, mistress. Did I do good? Riaz held him at arm's length before nodding, her eyes still streaming, and pulling him back in, unable to form any words. Nobody seemed keen to interrupt their moment until Surzek's Gremory began with a mischievous smile as his wife tried to stop him. Well then, as the sanctioning party, I declare the suitor's gambit over. Ria's Gremory's new groom is Belle Cranel. The red-headed devil paled before she turned to Belle, only to see that he was snoozing in her arms. Surzek sat back down only to get a hard slap across the head. Lily gritted her teeth and looked down gloomily at the news before Aquino whispered back to her as Tiona clapped with a cackling laugh. Don't worry, Lily. Polygamy is more common among devils than you'd think. I'm considering it myself. After all, Riaz and I share everything, and that display was delectable. You foo-foo. Lily blushed at the insinuation as Riaz grabbed onto Belle and began to fly away, stretching out her wings as far as they would go as she left the wolf whistles from the crowd down below. As soon as she was in the red sky of the underworld, the sounds from below fading into nothingness, she allowed herself to look down at Belle's sleeping face and couldn't help herself. Surely, he wouldn't mind a little peck on the cheek. And then his face turned just at the last second. Riaz nearly dropped him before realizing that he was still unconscious and screamed at herself in her mind. How stupid could she get? Quickly preparing a magic circle, she teleported the two back to Gakai and into her home. Still holding Belle in her arms, she ignored his room and went straight for her own. Stepping inside, Riaz laid the boy down and began to strip him of his destroyed armor. It was only then when she saw his determination laid bare. Bruises, burns and all manner of stress had built up in his muscles. It was horrifying and humbling all at once, and suddenly Aquino's words returned to her. I need to do something more for him. He sacrificed too much for me when I was being stupid. With only a second's hesitation, she stripped herself bare, embarrassed though she knew he was unconscious. Standing there in the nude, she crawled under the covers and gently pulled Belle into a hug as her demonic energy began to seep into him. Even in his unconscious state, the boy began to blush, and Riaz giggled to herself as she pulled his head to the top of her bosom and kissed the crown of his hair. Sleep well. My night. And he did. Timeskip Belle awoke, his eyelids fluttering open only to reveal porcelain skin. Wait, was that red hair? He almost began to try and extricate himself from the bed sheets before he heard a dissatisfied moan and stopped in fear. Belle, don't go. He had no idea how to react to the apparent situation he was in. Retracing his steps, he remembered fighting Riza, spending so long under that salamander wool that it was starting to get scattingly hot, finishing off Riza and then nothing. If he was in bed with Riaz, then it was unlikely that he'd been hallucinating his victory, but it still didn't explain exactly why he was in bed with her. Suddenly, as if from the ether, he heard his grandfather's voice in his head. It was whispering thoughts into his mind that Belle really didn't know if he should be having, and as he gazed up into his mistress' snoozing face, the voice became more and more insistent. Do it, Belle. This is your chance to go where no mortal man has gone before. Do the impossible, court the uncourtable. Kiss the devil. Do it. Do it. Belle mentally gave his mistress an apology as his face got closer to her own. Her lips, red and full, looked so inviting, and he heard his breath hitch for a second before suddenly feeling a hand on the back of his head that pushed him on a downwards trajectory. His face was firmly put between the woman's breasts, and he screamed internally as his mental grandfather flashed him a proud thumbs up, manly tears flowing down his wrinkled face. He didn't know how long he was stuck like that, though he was starting to black out before Riaz was awoken by a strand of hair falling in front of her face, causing her to let out a cute sneeze. She groggily woke up and looked around for a second before her eyes landed on Belle. His fearful eyes met her sleepy ones, and there was a noticeable sliding scale of embarrassment in her eyes until she giggled, not helping his situation whatsoever. Good morning, Belle. Sleep well. He let out a muffled scream that made her laugh even harder, pulling him closer into her embrace as he managed to escape the confines of her breasts and gasp for air. Oh, don't be such a prude, Belle. You did win me after all. Belle blinked in curiosity as he asked nervously, very aware just how smooth her skin was on his own. Thankfully, he still had his underwear on, but it seemed as if she had foregone even that. Wait, 1. Riaz giggled as she sat up and Belle averted his eyes nervously, trying to find a safe place to look only for his eyes to land on her underwear discarded at the side of the bed as his mistress laughed, feeling lighter than she ever had. Riza had been making all sorts of innuendos about their wedding night, and Ria's only solace in those moments as she was humiliated in front of her family was knowing that her cute little Belle would be cared for. Seeing him embarrassed like this, apparently not understanding exactly what a suitor's gambit entailed when he declared it, made her wonder how she had ever given up on staying with her peerage. Yep, the contract moved over to you when you beat Riza, so I guess you're looking at the new Mrs. Cranel. His ears started to leak steam as Riaz gently wrapped her arms around his mid-torso. Oh, I forget, since the contract changed hands, it hasn't been activated yet. He looked up at her in despair as Riaz giggled and pulled the covers over her once more, patting the bed for him to lay down next to her before she pouted as he scrambled to the side of the bed and sat down. Granted, it did allow Riaz to get a good look at his naked back, and she was very grateful for the view. When the hell had he gotten so yummy? Mistress, CC, can why you tell me what's going on? Mrs. Grafia said that I could stop the marriage but... Riaz sighed and began warmly, not entirely happy with his manner of address. Surely saving her was grounds for first-name basis, right? The contract is now unbreakable thanks to the laws surrounding duels for a hand, and no one can challenge you for me since it would mean a chain of duels until half the devil populace were dead trying to collect a trophy wife. However, my 21st is in 5 months, so we can organize a nice wedding, hum? I wonder if Lily would be your best man. You don't exactly have a male influence in your life after all. Belle looked as if he was about to pass out again before Riaz just laughed and sat up, putting her arms around his middle and whispering, Belle, you've saved me. Anne, I'm sorry. He suddenly tensed up as Riaz continued, her voice a mix of sheepish and remorse. I was an idiot, if I hadn't tried to protect you. Well, I don't regret that, but it still made you. A small dampness was felt on Belle's neck as Riaz began to let forth a few tears. He found his voice and he whispered, Why, Yuri? I'd do it again. She tightened her hold on him as Belle continued. I am greedy. I didn't do what you wanted, just because I was too scared to let you go. I'm sorry, mistress, but I can't let you go anymore. Is that bad? The woman laughed as she replied, nuzzling her cheek into the crook of Belle's neck. No, I don't think I ever want to let you go either. I promise you, Belle, I'll never, ever, let you go. You're my intended after all. Actually, let me ask you something, Belle. He hummed curiously, enjoying the moment despite his state of undress. Do you want another girl? Someone other than me? His reaction made Riaz laugh as Belle sputtered and tried to answer. The boy's mind was full of different teachings from his grandfather as they manifested as arguing versions of the old man. Say no. He's already got a high-class devil princess. That's more than he could ask for. Don't chance it. Another grandfather replied, pointing to the sky in defiance as he shouted. Never. A harem is a man's romance. Fight your common sense, Belle. Believe in the me who believes in your harem. Belle gulped before nodding. Riaz was about to continue before he asked in a quiet, nervous voice. Am I a bad person? I want. I like Miss Ais, and Lily. But I also like you. The redhead's heart was suddenly put at ease. She could have accepted that her marriage with Riza would have been loveless, but the same thought replaced with Belle seemed like a much crueler fate. Oh, you. Of course you can have us all. Belle turned to her in shock as Riaz explained warmly. You can't force a girl to join, but polyamory is quite popular among high-class devils. It may seem weird considering you're a human at heart, but us devils don't necessarily loathe the idea of being in a harem. Even my father had one, though he only bore children with my mother. He gulped before nodding, pondering the idea before Riaz suddenly leaned down and whispered teasingly. If you want a head start, I'm sure Lily would like to check to make sure you're okay. A full body examination sounds like fun. It seemed as if his resistance to getting teased just wasn't getting stronger at all. Belle sighed in defeat before yelping as Riaz pulled him with her back down to the covers, laughing all the while. Relax, Belle. You're gunning for a harem after all. Can't be too shy with your first girl. Belle gulped before bemoaning. I haven't even had my first kiss yet. I'm not cut out for this. Now, Riaz knew that he had in fact had his first kiss last night, but decided to let up on the teasing. After all, there would be a lot to do today. Craning her neck, she dropped a small kiss on the side of his cheek as she said with a giggle. Well, I'm sure you'll get there at the rate you're saving girls. Anyways, anything else? He muttered back, feeling especially conscious as he drew direct attention to the elephant in the room. Why are we naked? Riaz wanted desperately to tease him some more, but she'd promised herself to let up on him and explained kindly. I wanted to replenish your demonic energy. You expended quite a bit after all. If you have enough, your body heals quicker, so I shared some of mine with you. It's much more effective if we've got skin contact, so here we are. It didn't seem to calm him any as he asked curiously. Then, why didn't we just? Hold hands. That was it. She was teasing him again. Belle. How scandalous. Imagine, a king and her knight holding hands after he just won her hand in marriage. What would the ladies of the court think? Belle was burning red, wondering just how out of his depth he was until Riaz sighed and nuzzled into his back. Dummy. Fine, if it's seriously not okay, then go get your clothes. Promise I won't peek. He did so, still feeling uncomfortable even as he got into his clothes as Riaz unashamedly watched him from the bed, her fingers crossed under the covers. While she'd been holding back the signature Gremory affection in light of Belle's young age and the looming threat of Riza, there was no reason to hold back anymore. Once Belle was done, Riaz stepped out of the bed and grabbed her underwear, putting it on as Belle firmly looked at the door. Once she had put her clothes on, much to Belle's relief, she said as they made for the door. Now Belle, one more thing. He looked up at her curiously before Riaz said warmly, You are a part of my family, just as Aquino, Koneko, and Lily are. Call me Riaz, or I'll get upset. Belle gulped as he replied, feeling a bit weird as he tried the name on his tongue. Oh, okay, Riaz. The girl's face lit up happily as they stepped out of the room, though she didn't voice her happiness. Reaching the office, they stepped inside to see Aquino serving both Surzex and Grafia tea before she brought herself up to her full sight and stared directly at Riaz. There was a long, tense moment before Riaz bowed her head and whispered, Sorry, Aquino. Aquino didn't say anything until she set down the teapot and began walking towards Riaz. Riaz Gremory, you are the most idiotic, prideful, and hasty bitch this side of the underworld. Riaz didn't lift her head until suddenly Aquino wrapped her in a hug, whispering with a relieved voice. But you're my bitch, and you're safe, so I guess I'll let it slide. Congratulations, Riaz. The two girls shared their moment as Belle stepped away, a little unsure if he had a place next to them at the moment. Suddenly he was waved over by Surzex, who had a big grin on his face as Grafia picked up the teapot and poured Belle a cup. So this is the man of the hour, eh? Surzex Gremory, at your service. That was one hell of a show last night. Belle gulped as he took the tea with a word of thanks to the woman before turning back to Surzex, who was leaning back on the sofa with a carefree smile. Thank you, sir. Surzex waved him off with a scoff. Please, sir is my father. We're practically family anyways, so call me Surzex, or Zex, or sir, just don't make it so formal. The man laughed at his own joke as Grafia sighed, gripping the bridge of her nose. Eventually Surzex sobered up as Riaz and Aquino walked over and joined Belle on the couch. Riaz spoke up as she crossed her arms. So, what brings you here today, brother? It was obviously rhetorical, but Surzex humored her as he said with a grin. Well, I had to congratulate my sister on getting a better deal last night. It'd been nice to know there was a suitable challenger available, you know. Why didn't you tell me? Riaz was obviously still regretting keeping Belle away from the devil politics that surrounded her as she explained. I was being stupid, but that's in the past now. Brother, Belle Cranel, level 2 knight and my fiancée. Belle, Surzex Gremory, the great Satan Lucifer and my brother. Belle gulped as Riaz turned to Grafia and was about to continue before the maid spoke up with a slight grin. Oh, Master Belle and I are acquainted, Mistress Riaz. After all, who do you think got them to the party? The devil's eyes widened as Surzex gave his sister a grin. Couldn't do much to convince mother and father, so I asked Grafia to assist them when Aquino came running. Riaz blinked before giving her brother a bright smile and jumping over the table to hug him as Surzex laughed. Belle was surprised. He'd never seen Riaz act this young before. Thank you, big brother. Aquino sighed and leaned against Belle as she whispered with a small smile. Loki hates it that she can't get as close to Surzex as Riaz can. Those two can be at each other's throat 1 minute and then friendly the next. He nodded, feeling his own smile stretch across his face as he watched the interaction. He had wondered many times what it'd be like to have an older sibling he could rely on, and he hadn't even noticed it, but he was starting to think of Aquino like that. Eventually Riaz composed herself and Surzex began with a nod. All right, the first order of business is that the fight was shown across Rio. Belle tilted his head as Riaz groaned in despair. So, everyone saw. Surzex nodded with a small apologetic grin. Yeah, Lord Phoenix thought it was a good idea, and since it was only a magic mirror, Uranus allowed it. If it's any consolation, it was pretty late, so not many people saw it. However, once the rumors spread, it'll be bad. Try to do some damage control if you can. Riaz crossed her arms as she pondered how to deal with the news. Surzex continued as she did so. Riza Phoenix is stable, though it's unlikely he'll wake up for a long time. That knife of yours did a number on him. Lord Phoenix sends his best and thanks you for beating some sense into his blabbering fool of a son, his words not mine. That was a relief at least. Speaking up, Belle asked nervously. Sir Ozex. What should I do now? He laid back against the back of the sofa as he said loosely. Well, I'm not going to tell you to stop adventuring, but I'd like to have a niece or nephew for my son to play with. Imagine Milikas and a little white-haired baby. It'd be adorable. Belle's face lit up as Riaz began grinning at the image as Aquino giggled at his desperate pleas for help. Grafia slapped Surzex around the head and gave Belle a sympathetic smile. Master Belle, please, don't mind him. I'll be certain to give him a lesson in proper etiquette before your next meeting. He nodded silently before Surzex waved him off with a smile, cowed by Grafia's warning. Obviously that can come later. Now, in truth, keep going lower in the dungeon and get stronger. You're an adventurer, this doesn't change much until Ria's birthday. Get to know each other, why? I remember Riaz enjoying Eastern-style tea houses quite a bit. The man gave Belle a knowing wink as he stood up and stretched. Alrighty then. I guess I'll leave you lovebirds to it. Welcome to the family, Belle. I hope we'll get along. They said their farewells and the three were left sitting alone. Belle wasn't entirely sure how to broach a conversation before the door opened, revealing Lily. She yawned and muttered, You guys done yet? Riaz stood up at Lily's appearance and suddenly the prum remembered her harsh words to the devil from the night before. She began to wonder if it was time for her to run before Riaz bowed lowly. Lily, thank you so much for taking care of Belle for me. Anne, for knocking some sense into me last night. Lily wasn't entirely sure how to respond before Riaz said with conviction in her voice. I promise to do better, with both you and Belle. No more secrets. But first of all, she straightened out her back as she extended her hand towards the girl. You've done what was best for me, Belle and the peerage. I have wanted to ask this for a while, but I was too busy in my own mind to do what my heart wanted. Lilarukarad, will you join my peerage? Lily crossed her arms, pretending to think it over before deflating and sighing. Of course I want to join, but how will I? I still have Soma's Falna, and it's not like I'll be able to get out without paying the leaving fee. Riaz shook her head and turned to Aquino, who nodded before leaving the room and returning shortly with a large chest. Setting it on the table, Riaz asked as Aquino opened up the container to reveal a giant hoard of gemstones and coins that almost immediately had Lily salivating. How much is the fee? Lily shook herself out of it before replying sadly. It was 3 million. Miss Riaz, I can't ask you to dash before she could finish that thought. Riaz had passed over a small handful of gemstones. That should cover it. Now, Belle, Aquino, you two escort Lily to the Soma Familia and ensure she doesn't get ripped off. Lily, once you get back, you'll have a pawn piece waiting. Lily gaped before beginning in shock, looking at the gemstones in amazement. Miss Riaz, I can't accept these. Riaz sighed before turning to Belle with a pout on her face. Belle, she won't take them. Could you tell her? Belle laughed at the expression before turning to Lily with a big grin. Lily, think about it. When we're in the middle floors, we can pay back Miss Riaz every valis. So let's work hard, okay? Lily sighed and capitulated, replying morosely. Well, if Master Belle says it's a good idea. All right, let's go. With a new pep in her step, Lily made for the door as they all followed along, laughing at her excitement. As they reached the door, Lily raced ahead with Aquino following behind, but Riaz grabbed Belle just before he could follow. Turning him back, she straightened out his shirt before dropping a kiss on his cheek with a mischievous smirk. Have a good day today, honey. Belle nearly melted down before Lily called after him to hurry up, and he took the opportunity to escape. As the three walked through the streets, up in Babel, a certain irate goddess wine glass smashed as her grip turned vice-like. Gremory, you will burn one day, but not this day. My Belle will be mine, and none of your lures can stop me. Chapter 9. Lily stood behind Belle and Aquino as they stared down the captain of the Soma Familia, Zanis. Aquino was speaking as Belle let Lily hold onto his sleeve, knowing that this must be terrifying for her. These were the same people that had exploited her for her entire life. Finally leaving must be nerve-wracking. And so, Lilaruka here will be coming with us. Your exiting fee. Zanis gulped as the level 5 stared him down. This wasn't how it was supposed to go at all. He needed the prum's Cinderella for his own plans, damn it. Well, I suppose we could let her go for the standard exit fee of 5 million. He was certain that would scare off the terrifying woman. There was no way that she'd pay that much for the little bitch. However, It just made Aquino give him a sadistic smile as she said warningly, "Now, trying to cheat me out of money is a particularly bad idea. 3 million. Zanis gulped in fear as the smell of ozone filled the room. He turned to his god for help, only to despair when he saw the man not even looking up at the commotion. Gritting his teeth, Zanis growled in anger and took the gemstones and pocketed them before turning to Soma with a distasteful snarl. "My lord, release this girl of her falna." Soma looked up, his dead eyes staring directly at Zanis before turning to Lily. "Who are you?" Lily's lip began to quiver before Belle spoke up, infuriated at the lack of recognition. Lily was his divine child. How could he not know her face at least? "You don't need to worry about that anymore." Soma looked up at Belle for a second before nodding and standing up, walking over to her and taking a needle from the wall. Piercing his finger, he smeared it on Lily's neck as Belle watched the proceedings as Aquino kept Zanis pinned with her stare. After a second, Lily gasped as her divine strength left her, and Belle had to catch her before she fell to the ground. "Lily, are you feeling okay?" She nodded shakily before Belle picked her up, much to her indignation. Bowing his head to a curious Soma, Belle made for the exit, as did Aquino before the god called after him curiously. "Boy, tell me, why do you carry that girl?" Belle gritted his teeth, and Lily felt her heart flutter at his anger on her behalf. It was nice to know that he was still in her corner, even after he was engaged to Ria's. "Because she needs help, and you never gave it to her." They walked out of the familiar house, and Belle looked down at Lily in worry. "Lily, do you need to sit down for a bit?" The girl shook her head, tucking her head into the crook of Belle's arm as she replied with a smile. "No thank you, Master Belle. Could you just take me back to the peerage's house? I'd like to get reincarnated as soon as possible." Belle nodded as Aquino pouted in envy. Lily just stuck a tongue up at her playfully as she enjoyed the heat coming from her carrier. When they returned, Riaz giggled at Lily's position in Belle's arms before asking with a smile, "So, it's done? Well then, Lily, do you think you can walk with me up to your room? Also, you two, stay downstairs. This is a private ceremony after all." Aquino led Belle towards the dining room, promising him the breakfast he hadn't had a chance to eat as Lily pouted and stood on her own feet. Following her soon-to-be mistress, Lily asked nervously, Miss Riaz?" The devil hummed curiously as they entered Lily's room, a barren place with naught but a wardrobe that held her clothes that Belle had gotten her and the backpack hung on the door. If I become a devil, can I be with Master Belle?" Riaz giggled as she motioned for Lily to sit on the bed. She did so, and Riaz joined her before replying in the same smooth, mysterious voice that she'd used with Belle when she'd offered him his place. "Lily, you can do so much more than be with him. Tell me, what do you wish for?" Lily gulped at the change of tone and replied breathlessly. This was a highborn devil in all her glory, and Lily couldn't help but reply honestly. "To kill the old Lily and become one that Master Belle can rely on. To be wealthy, so I'm not hungry ever again. I want to be with Master Belle forever, and have him look at me as something more than a supporter." Riaz hummed with a bemused smirk as she replied, "Lilaruka Ard, as a devil, you will reach wealth unparalleled. You shall never go hungry again, as you shall eat of the finest food and drink of the sweetest wine. The man you treasure shall notice you, not as his colleague, but as the beautiful young woman you are. Tell me, will you accept my invitation?" A pair of pawn pieces circled around in Ria's hand for a second before Lily gulped and nodded. Riaz smiled down at her and whispered, "Then be reborn as my servant, Lilaruka Ard," and the world flashed red before Lily fell unconscious. Riaz sighed as she set the girl down on the bed, smiling at her peaceful expression. Finally, the girl that had been living with them for the past month had been brought into the fold. She was really starting to doubt the judgment of herself, knowing that this was the girl that Belle had put his life on the line for. Of course she would be worth something. Why hadn't she set her free before? Setting it aside as hindsight, Riaz walked down the stairs to find Belle and Aquino eating breakfast and sighed as she sat down next to the boy, pinching a piece of toasted bread from his plate and putting it between her lips and taking a bite. "Well, Lily's sleeping, but she's in. 2 pawn pieces." Belle's face lit up happily as Aquino clapped excitedly. "Oh, I cannot wait to see her with her wings. She must look adorable. Oh, Riaz, I remembered that Koneko is still down in Rivera." Suddenly Riaz remembered the final member of her peerage and groaned, slamming her head on the table as Belle asked nervously, What's wrong? Doesn't Miss Tuju go down there a lot?" Riaz was too busy slamming her head into the table as Aquino explained. "She's down there to train. For the rating game she'd been expecting." While that would be fine in any other case, Koneko's been down there for months at a time for the past 3 years. Belle gaped in shock as Rias groaned in self-pity. What will she think when you come in and save me after only just becoming a level 2? I feel so bad for her. Akino smiled sympathetically before replying. Well, Koneko should just be happy that you're free. And besides, it's not like we'll never have conflict again. She nodded, still looking troubled before Akino offered with a knowing grin. I know what might take your mind off it. Belle won't be going into the dungeon today. Lily is asleep after all. Rias, how about you take a break? Belle blinked in surprise as Rias responded with a disapproving frown. Akino, you know I can't afford to dash her. Queen cut her off as she said with a reproachful look. Rias, I don't need to tell you how stressful this has been for all of us. You need a break, or else you'll burn out. I'm certain Belle would enjoy some time off too. Why don't you two go out and enjoy yourselves? Belle considered the idea. It would be nice to take a break for a day. Judging from Ria's expression, she was also convinced, and she turned to Belle with a mysterious smile as she said excitedly, all right, meet me at Amor Square at 5, okay? I've got to go and get ready. He didn't get a chance to respond as Rias stood up and ran off, a beaming smile on her face as Belle sighed in confusion. Akino giggled at the response before offering kindly. I think you'll need some nicer clothes for tonight. Do you have enough money for a suit? The boy hummed in thought as he responded, wondering how much a suit cost. I've got about 200,000. Is that enough? Akino nodded and explained. Go and speak to Mr. or Mrs. Arash. They'll have you looking proper before tonight if you agree to model for them. Oh, and make sure you bathe. It wouldn't do for you to be smelling like soot. Belle blushed as he took a small sniff of himself and realized that indeed he still had the smell of brimstone on him. Standing up, he went to get his money before stepping outside into the air. He sighed, wondering what else the day had in store for him as he made for the tailor's shop. The man looked nigh apoplectic when Belle asked him if he could have it done by his deadline. I cannot make any promises. 120,000. He gulped at the large price before nodding, following the expert's instructions as he modeled 20 different types of cloth before the man seemed to be satisfied. Belle stepped down from the stool in front of a mirror as he began to look across the racks of clothes. The tailor worked from the desk, sewing with a master's eye as he spoke up suddenly. Tell me, boy, you're Himajima's junior, no? Why didn't you come and get a suit before now? IDVE expected you to need one. That wasn't a hard question, but Belle didn't know how he should answer for a few seconds. Well, it was because he hadn't needed one. But why? The tailor seemed to catch the meaning before sighing and imparting some wisdom on the young devil. Your jewel is already well known in devil circles. You must learn how to handle high society, even if you're an adventurer. The clothes make the man, but the clothes can only be as good as the man wearing them. Meanwhile in Babel, Rias sighed in delight as she sank into the waters of the divine bathroom, a facility for the supernatural women of Gakkai. It was a lavish place, with fountains and holy ornamentation, and it was certainly of a higher caliber than the shower at her peerage's home. She had decided that she'd at least to try and go all out on the date that she was looking forward to. Before long, a blonde goddess with a kind demeanor walked over and said warmly, Rias dear, it has been too long. That was quite the news this morning. The redhead looked up at her and before greeting her with a smile. Demeter, indeed, it has been. And I don't disagree, even I was shocked when he appeared. Demeter sat down next to her, her towel covering her modesty as the other goddess in the bath began to crowd around, hungry for gossip. Are you disappointed? I heard that you activated your contract early. Was Riza that special to you? Rias made a face as she replied, extending her leg out of the water to inspect her skin. Not a chance. I was just not thinking straight. I'm glad that Belle showed up and won my hand. Suddenly a goddess that Rias hadn't encountered before asked excitedly. Oh Rias, you minx. So, you're into the younger type. I've got to say, you Gremory devils really have some interesting tastes. One of your servants as well. Oh, it's giving me chills. There was a murmur of agreement as Rias smirked, lowering her leg as she replied smugly. Well, it's certainly nice to have a man in my peerage, especially one like Belle. He was my knight in shining armor after all. Demeter giggled as she remarked. That's quite the statement, Rias. So, what's he like? Riza did call him a rabbit, and I'm not inclined to disagree. He was so cute. Evidently, they were surprised when Rias didn't start getting jealous as she replied with a grin, closing her eyes as she envisioned the face of the boy who had saved her. Well, he's a little bit foolish, and not without his flaws. He's bad at accepting affection, and he's too weak to being teased even though he wants to collect a harem like any boy his age. But there's this naive bravery to him that I just can't help but love. All of the goddesses squealed as Demeter asked again hungrily. So, you love him? Oh, Riaz, that's quite the position you find yourself in. Riaz laughed lightly, replying as she stretched out her wings and began to gently rub them down with scented oils, ensuring the black skin glistened in the brazier light. I wouldn't ask for anyone else. I do hope he begins to grow out of his embarrassed phase, or else I'll walk all over him. Now that I mention it. The girl gained a far-off grin as the goddesses yelled in delight at the show. Riaz chuckled at their behavior. The gods of Tenkai really were easy to play if you knew how to push their buttons. Eventually she had decided that she was as clean as she could get, and she knew she'd be taking her time on her dress anyways. With Bel, he was already dressed in his newly tailored suit after bathing at Babel quickly. He was standing in a more square, wondering if he had the right time as people began looking at him with certain expressions he wasn't so sure he liked. Before long, an Amazoness in a dancer's garb walked over to him and asked seductively, "Hey there, White Wings, get stood up. I can make you forget all about Dash." She was cut off as a hand grasped her shoulder tightly. "Run along now, this isn't the pleasure quarter." The Amazoness gritted her teeth as she stormed off. Bel, however, was stunned in place, staring at his mistress as if frozen in time. She had put on a dress that seemed to be made of glittering scales that left a small amount of cleavage visible. Her face seemed sharper, more refined, though Bel couldn't tell why as she tilted her head with a smile, flashing a golden earring from behind her hair. It was only when she began to giggle when Bel realized that he was staring and looked to the side hastily as Riaz asked in amusement, "So then, how do I look?" She did a small twirl, and Bel's mind was racing with all sorts of forbidden memories as he replied, Why you aar dash." Riaz leaned in closer and whispered, "And Cam." Her warm breath tickled his ear as Bel took a deep breath and gulped, replying with less of a stutter, "Be breathtaking." Riaz blinked in surprise before a small blush graced her cheeks as she gave him a sweet smile. "Thank you, Bel. See, that wasn't so hard, was it? And might I say, you clean up very well. Now, shall we?" She offered him her arm, and Bel took it, hastily running through all the non-perverted lessons that his grandfather had given him on courting women. He had no idea where was being taken until they were suddenly stood outside a large fancy-looking restaurant. A crystal fountain made entirely of glass doves stood in the courtyard outside, and Bel gulped as he said nervously, Miss. Sorry. Riaz. I don't know if I can dash." The redhead waved him off. She often forgot that he'd come from a village in the mountains north of Orario. "Oh, don't worry about it, Bel. My family owns this place." Bel gaped in surprise as Riaz giggled and laughed, walking towards the ornate entrance as she explained. "My mother, Venelana, married my father Zeoticus from the Bale family. She has a good eye for business, and with the Gremory wealth, she began the family's presence on Gokkai. We are the premier holder of luxury residences, hotels, and fine dining in Orario, though we have a presence in major centers around Gokkai and the underworld." The boy gulped as the frankly terrifying-looking bouncers stepped out of the way of them as they opened the doors. Inside was particularly lavish, with a pure white interior decorated with plentiful water fountains made of glass that seemed to weave around the walls in a mesmerizing display. Riaz smiled and gave a mental fist pump at Bel's odd expression, "Success. Shall we get seated?" She had to pull him along as they walked towards the seating area. It was a large cathedral-like space, but each piece of furniture seemed to dance with light as Riaz took a seat at one of the beautifully carved glass tables. Almost immediately a murmuring started up as Bel's wings began to shuffle under his suit while he sat down as Riaz giggled. "Feeling stuffy? Just wait until the marriage." Now then, a waiter with skin as pale as snow appeared from seemingly nowhere and Bel had to suppress a yelp. Riaz didn't seem too bothered as she requested, "The Gremory Estates 132 red, please. I trust you can pair a suitable meal to it." The waiter nodded and Bel blinked as he seemingly disappeared into nothingness, as if swallowed by a passing shine of light. Riaz explained as she looked around nostalgically. "The Lumiere du Pandemonium, the crown of the Gremory Group's holdings. I've grown up in places like this, so I guess I'm a bit used to it all. What do you think?" Bel gulped as he replied meekly, feeling well and truly out of place. It's very nice but." Another beam of light overcame them, and suddenly 2 plates of food were in front of him and Bel began to salivate at the smell as Riaz took up the ornate wineglass that had accompanied it. "It can be hard to have a normal conversation, right?" Say what you want about the atmosphere, but the food is to die for. Bell nodded, picking up his fork and knife and cutting a small piece of the steak and setting it in his mouth. It melted in his mouth and Bell was amazed at the flavor and texture as Riaz joined him after taking a sip. She didn't seem too out of place, her demeanor jovial as she made small talk with Bell about the various times she'd been here. It was nice, really nice. Just speaking to her like a normal person made Bell feel a lot less nervous about his apparent engagement to the girl, and in time he'd even stopped stumbling between Mistress and Riaz. All in all, the night was going well, right up until another party entered the room and all heads turned. Bell couldn't blame them all. One of the women was an extraordinarily beautiful one, though the other made Bell's heart sink. Loki, a large-bore man, accompanied them, and he was in a suit that seemed just as out of place on him as Bell's did on his. The beautiful one turned her eyes to them, and both of their gazes locked, and Bell suddenly felt as if he'd met her before, but he was sure to have noticed her before, right? Riaz sighed in annoyance and muttered, "Of course, those two just had to show up. It sours the wine." Loki seemed particularly ecstatic to see them again as she raced over in a dress. "Hey, I. What are you doing here?" Riaz gripped the stem of her wine glass angrily, and Bell gulped before speaking up. Miss, that's a bit dash." She turned to him with a bored stare and asked in a dismissive voice. "Who you?" "Anyways, dash." Loki was cut off as Bell replied with a small shake in his voice, though Riaz could tell it wasn't the same warble that indicated sadness. "No." Bell seemed genuinely annoyed at the snubbing. "I am Riaz Knight and intended goddess Loki, and you know that." The woman blinked and turned back to Bell, not heeding his request as she suddenly placed his face. "Oh, tomato devil. I didn't even recognize you without those wings of yours out." The other woman walked over as the boar man followed, and Bell could tell that his eyes were locked directly on him with an intense stare that made him sweat under the collar. "Riaz, darling, it's lovely to see you again. I see you and Loki are just as amiable." Riaz gritted her teeth, the glass in her hand shaking as she replied. "Freya, indeed, my opinions on her haven't changed a bit. Though, I will ask in future that you don't call him Tomato Devil in future." Loki groaned as she replied in disappointment, evidently enjoying the rise she got out of the girl. "Oh, but I was going to bring that up at tomorrow's Donatus as his alias. What are we going to call him now? The Phoenix fighter who can't even win a duel without preparing a cheat item." Before Bell could defend his honor, Riaz stood up and gave Loki a glare that she had never leveled against her before. The goddess of mischief had seen frustrated anger, petulant annoyance, and despair leveled against her from the crimson-haired ruined princess, but the red lightning bouncing around her fingers was something else. "Loki, I have neither the time nor patience for you tonight. And I recall a certain incident involving you, my brother's wine, a love potion, and my nephew. Must I finally reveal the details of the night to him in a formal notice?" Loki's joviality was suddenly quenched as Freya giggled. "Why, Riaz, I haven't seen you this fiery before. Have we done something to upset you? I'm sure your date would be loath to see that makeup go to waste." Riaz seemed more than fed up as she grabbed Bell's arm and forced hers through it, pulling the boy to his feet as she said angrily, "Quite. I think my fiancé and I will take our leave." She stormed out of the restaurant, pulling Bell behind her as he tried to keep up. As they stepped out into the cool air, Riaz was still fuming, but she stopped as they reached the fountain. She sat down and held her head in her hands, groaning in a mixture of rage and despair. One night where I can relax and those two show up." While Bell was bothered by the two goddesses, he wasn't that upset. After all, before they'd arrived, the dinner had been nice, and he knew that it was what he'd rather remember from the night. Sitting down next to her, he comforted her softly. "It's not a problem, Riaz. They are just trying to be pests." Riaz sighed and tilted her head back, looking up at the sky with a sad expression. "No, I'm just mad at myself. This was supposed to be a nice night, and I let myself get worked up just because they appeared. When Loki accused you of cheating, it just... Bell laughed at the ringing motion she made with her hands and said with a small smile, looking out at the stars, "I don't mind it. She's entitled to her opinion. But I'd rather win dishonorably than lose you. Besides," he grinned as he remembered Koneko's few words to him. It had been so long since he'd actually seen his full stats that he'd realized that it didn't even matter that much. Inadvertently, she'd managed to help him save Riaz. "I was just taking my threats seriously." Riaz smirked as she cottoned on and muttered, "Yeah. So, what now? I think Aquino would kill both of us if we return this early." He hummed in thought for a second before replying nervously, "We could go to a tea house." Surzek said you liked them. Do you know a nice one nearby? Riaz stood up excitedly as she replied, her excitement returning. That sounds great. Let's go. It's just a few minutes away. He laughed as he followed her, trying to stop her from running. Eventually they found themselves in a bit of a rundown area, and Riaz walked into a building with odd architecture. A small bell rang out to announce their entrance, and an elderly woman in an unusual long gown looked over to them in surprise. Why, is that you, Riaz? How you've grown. Though I do have to wonder why you're in a dress for a place like this. Riaz grinned sheepishly, scratching the side of her face as she replied, sitting down at a table as Belle followed. Sorry, Mrs. Houski, tonight didn't go quite to plan. This is Belle Cranel, my new fiancée. May I prepare it? Belle bowed respectfully to the woman as she chuckled, her aged lines receding as she replied. As I live and breathe, this time Riaz brings a respectable young man here. Please, allow me to congratulate you. Now boy, treasure this girl well, you hear? She's had enough trouble with men. He laughed nervously as he replied. I promise. Soon enough a strange teapot was sat in front of them, as well as 2 wooden cups without handles. Riaz set about preparing the tea, and Belle couldn't help but be enthralled by her process. It had the same methodical, deliberate nature that she had at her desk, but the process seemed to come more naturally to her. Just as she came to a stop, ladling tea into the 2 cups, Belle asked quietly, Riaz, why did you become a diplomat? She stopped in midair as she began to pass over a cup before sighing and setting it down and grabbing her own, looking down into the green liquid as she began. Well, I suppose you'd have to know eventually. Well, to put it shortly, Aquino can't go down into the dungeon anymore. There was an incident involving Evelus which resulted in many familiars' children being killed, and Aquino channeled demonic power down in the dungeon. It recognized it, and now it considers her an aberrant monster, so going down there is a death sentence. Brother took up the position of great Satan Lucifer, and with what was expected of me. Well, it was the natural option. Belle nodded, imagining what kind of monster would require Aquino of all people to use something that strong in the dungeon. Riaz sighed and continued with a small smile, sipping her tea. Anyways, that's in the past. Aquino and I are more suited to a desk job anyways, neither of us like combat. Sipping his tea, Belle began to appreciate the atmosphere a lot more than the fancy restaurant. Maybe it was just because it reminded him of his home back in the village, but sitting in a warm room in comfortable silence was much more calming. Eventually Riaz began again, pouring out some more tea into her cup. Donatus is happening soon, you know. You'll finally get your alias. Excited. He tilted his head curiously before Riaz explained with a giggle. It's like how Ais Wallenstein is known as the Sword Princess. Aquino herself used to go by Fallen Angel. It's a name handed down by the supernatural, though the names can be quite contentious at times. I had to fight tooth and nail to keep Koneko from being called Snow Kitty, managed to get White Cat in the end. Any preferences? Belle laughed at the idea of the stone-cold rook being called something that cutesy before replying with a grin. I guess. I mean, it's a name handed down from natural devils and gods. How couldn't I be excited? As for preferences, maybe not Tomato Devil. He was quite pleased with himself when he managed to elicit a giggle from her before he continued. I like Finn Daimner's alias, the Braver. It's like it's a trait, like he'll brave any challenge. I think it's a good name. Riaz nodded with a far-off look before sighing and beginning beseechingly. Look, it may not be my place, but please don't judge Koneko too harshly based off your interactions with the Loki familiar. I'm not asking you to stop being friendly with their members. In fact, I encourage it. But don't ask Koneko to accept being friendly with them too. Belle hummed in thought, wondering exactly what had occurred to make the cat girl hate them so much. Deciding it probably wasn't the nicest topic for tonight, he nodded and continued to sip his tea. Eventually the pot was empty, and they both stood up. Before Riaz could pay, Belle took out 1,000 valis and sat it on the desk in front of the astonished woman before offering Riaz his arm with an inviting smile. It was my idea after all. Riaz was shocked that he'd taken the initiative like that before giggling and nodding, taking his arm as she bade farewell to the woman. They stepped out into the cold air and made their way back to the peerage's house. However, upon noticing that Riaz was shivering in the cool air, Belle pulled her a little closer much to her shock. What's brought this on, Belle? You were a mess this morning. Not that I'm complaining. She was about the same height as him, and he sighed as he ran a hand through his hair and replied nervously. I am just. I guess I'm just getting used to the idea. Though I'd like to have some say when I wake up naked. Riaz giggled as she leaned into him, replying apologetically, though he could tell she wasn't actually sorry. Okay, promise I'll buy you dinner beforehand next time. He sighed in defeat as they entered the house. Stepping inside, they walked up the stairs until they reached Riaz's door. Riaz let go of him with a hint of disappointment before whispering, I really enjoyed tonight, Belle. Thank you. Good night. Just as she turned to enter her room, she felt a slight ghost of lips on her cheek and turned around in shock only to see the boy rushing into his room. Lifting her hand to the cheek, she giggled as she entered the room and rushed over to the bed and dove under the covers and embraced a pillow, grinning like an idiot as she did so. She hadn't believed she would ever have a normal love life ever since she'd become the heir of Gremory, but tonight had shattered her illusions in a spectacular fashion. Let them speak. She was going to enjoy this. Chapter notes. Whoa. We're halfway there. The sound of combat echoed through the middle floors as Bell jumped back, his replacement armor constricting his movements more than he cared for. Stabbing into the flesh of the monster that had nearly gotten to Lily, Bell gritted his teeth as he had to jump out of the way of a passing fireball. Lily raised her little crossbow and fired a bolt straight between the final hellhound's eyes, killing it quickly. They were left in silence as Bell began to huff and puff. This was the 16th floor, the last of the middle floors, and he was starting to realize exactly much he was beginning to require another party member as Lily went about picking up the magic stones. He hadn't leveled up from his fight with Razor, which was simultaneously unfortunate and probably for the best. He'd apparently attracted enough attention with the news that he was level 2, the fastest in history, clocking in at 2 months. He really didn't need to do so again before he'd even received his alias. He gave a thought to Riaz, who had to be at the Donatus to receive his title today. It had been 2 days since his. Well, there was no other way to put it than date, with Riaz, and she'd even begun waking up early enough to bid them a good day before they left. Meanwhile, with the girl in question, the rabble of Donatus covered the floor as Riaz groaned in boredom. It was never common to see devils come here, as it was seen primarily as a divine event, though occasionally one would turn up to receive an alias before leaving and not reporting a level up again. It was Riaz's turn on the chopping block apparently, as she kept up her empty, curious expression, while Loki of all people made the rounds. As this was happening, a god sat down next to Riaz and gave her a nod, his clothes humble but his hair well kempt. Riaz Gremory, it has been too long. Riaz nodded back measuredly, replying, Take a Mikazuchi, likewise. What brings you to this Donatus? The man smiled proudly as he replied, I have to receive one of my children's first alias, Mikoto Yamato. I believe she leveled up around the same time as the boy you brought to Miss Houseke's shop the other night. She didn't allow herself to be fazed as she replied with a small smile. Oh, I'm glad to hear it. That will be your second third-class adventurer, correct? Congratulations. Take Mikazuchi smiled in turn, letting some of the seriousness fall from his shoulders as he began. Well, that's Hestia returned to Tenkai for now. Apparently she's decided that Gukkai isn't all it's cracked up to be. That girl really doesn't understand hard work. But on to more pleasant matters. I saw the recording of the Suitor's Gambit. What an outcome. My children could learn a thing or two from him, Mikoto in particular. They still refuse to get salamander wool for the middle floors. It keeps me up at night. Riaz blinked in worry, knowing that salamander wool had been the trump card that allowed Bell to win his fight against Riza, and he'd only espoused its worth on the middle floors. I'd be more than willing to loan you the money, no rate and by monthly payments. You have been good to the destitute. The man sighed as he replied with a grateful expression. I cannot let my pride get in the way of my children's safety. I graciously accept. Riaz smiled as she crossed her arms, replying with a mischievous smile. That's good to hear. However, I do hope we can help each other attain an acceptable alias for their children. Take Mikazuchi chuckled as he noted. Gremory though you are, your Bale blood is apparent. I'm glad to see that child of yours has returned that fire to your eyes. Now then, I believe it is coming to us. Indeed, Loki had been going through the documents and was delighting in the despairing looks of the gods and goddesses who had gotten names that sounded straight out of a children's book. Ah, Mikoto Yamato, take Mikazuchi familiar. She's level 2 now. She's a pretty one. Child of the night, night ninja. Take Mikazuchi's face paled as Riaz called out challengingly. That seems particularly vindictive. Get turned down again, Loki. The rest of the divine host began to laugh as Loki's grip crumpled the sheet in her hands. Aye. Little girls that haven't even seen a century should really know when to close their mouths. Riaz hummed in amusement as she offered, ignoring the comment. She seems like an honorable one, and she doesn't appear to be anything like a ninja. Surely there's something more fitting for her. Taika Mikazuchi looked extremely relieved as the rest of the divines began calling out suggestions until it was eventually settled that the girl would have the name Little Crow. You really are a lifesaver. Loki began to shuffle through the papers before she grinned in excitement as she pulled out a specific sheet. Ah, and what would you know, it's all White Wings the cheetah himself. I say we call him Tomato Devil. The rest of the divine host muttered in confusion as Loki realized that nobody else in the room was in on the story. Taika Mikazuchi called out, stealing his nerves as he opposed the goddess of a frankly gargantuan familiar compared to his. That's a weak name compared to your usual ones, Loki. Do you have a soft spot for the boy? The goddess of mischief began to grit her teeth in frustration as Rias called out mockingly. Oh, that's quite the troubling news, Loki, though I'm sure he'll be flattered. Loki gritted her teeth as she continued in desperation. White Wings. The idea was passed around thoughtfully before someone else walked into the room, namely Freya. She wasn't accompanied by anyone, and she began apologetically as she sat down next to Rias without a care for the young woman's warning glare. Ah, it seems I'm just in time. Loki dearest, who are we discussing currently? Loki replied with a grin, sure that she'd finally gotten an ally in the ceremony. Ah, Fry. Bell Cranel, you know, Lil Rii's knight and intended. What was that one from a few nights ago? Phoenix Fighter. Ria's expression turned troubled as a few gods began to laugh at the name. That was right up until Freya called out chastising. Now Loki, that's just inviting conflict with the underworld. Him. What was that name the Phoenix boy gave him? Rabbit. Rather fitting, no. Loki grabbed onto the name. Sure, it would irritate Rias only to feel a tick in her eye as she saw the girl staring off into space with a dopey grin on her face. No objections here. The authority was taken away from Loki as the gods began to debate on the name. Eventually, after a minute of deliberation, the name Loki called out through her teeth was Rookie Rabbit. Rias sighed at the unfortunate suffix as she stood up, nodded to the assembled and left. As she walked through Babel, wanting to return home to her work as soon as possible though hoping that she'd be able to see Belle beforehand, she was suddenly greeted by Freya. It was a quiet hallway, and Rias wasn't too sure what to think of her. While she had very few personal quarrels with the goddess herself, she was still in the company of Loki, and she was fairly certain she'd had her claws in Surzex at some point. Freya. Freya crossed her arms under her bust, replying with a voice somewhere between apologetic and amused. Rias, I simply wish to apologize for the night at the Lumiere. I should have realized that you were on a date. Something in her tone of voice told Rias that she knew full well that they were on a date and voiced as much with a distrustful expression. I find that hard to believe for some reason. Freya, speak your business and leave me in peace. Freya began to walk past her as she replied in a sad tone of voice, though Rias could tell there was an edge underneath it. That's a shame, you are quite the extraordinary girl. Treasure his loyalty while you have it. With that, Rias was left alone, and she redoubled her speed to return home. The threat had been well understood, and she began to feel a well of doubt in her heart about how she measured up to a goddess of beauty in Belle's eyes. Meanwhile, Belle and Lily exited the dungeon, sighing as Belle looked down at the horrible state of his armor. It had become destroyed thanks to its unwieldiness, and he was really starting to miss his old set that had been destroyed by Razor. It was similar to the make the Minotaur had destroyed, though nowhere near as long-lasting. Lily, I think I'm going to go and find some new armor today. Can we meet back at home? The supporter blinked before nodding, asking worriedly. Master Belle, are you feeling all right? You look a bit down. He gave her a grin as he replied reassuringly. It's nothing. I'm just a bit worried about my performance today. Lily nodded as she replied confidently. I'm sure Master Belle just needs to find some new armor. Everyone has bad days after all. I'll keep an eye out for new party members in any case. We'll need them if we want to make the push into Riviera. Belle nodded and bade farewell to the girl, beginning to walk towards Babel's elevators to bring him to the middle floors. Searching for a few minutes, he eventually came to the shop he was looking for and stepped inside. This was the place he'd found his first set of armor, and he remembered the name engraved on it vividly, Welf Crozzo. A red-haired young man was arguing with the shop clerk about something, and Belle didn't think it was a good idea to interrupt them at the moment. Going to the place where he'd found the armor, he was disappointed to see that nothing had the same marking. Resigning himself to his fate, Belle walked over to the counter and spoke up, cutting through the argument. Excuse me? I was looking for armor. Do you have anything by Welf Crozzo? They suddenly stopped arguing and turned to him in shock before the young man's expression turned from anger into vindictive satisfaction. Well, you found the man himself. See, I told you people want my armor. Anyways, let's get out of here. Bell blinked in surprise as he was led out of the shop by the ecstatic man claiming to be Welf Crozzo. He found himself sitting with him on a bench, the draft of wind coming in from the large balcony behind them. Well then, Welf Crozzo, at your service. You were looking for my armor, eh? Bell nodded as he pulled off his current destroyed armor, looking at it down uneasily. It had been the best option at the time, but even then, it still didn't let his wings out and he took the opportunity to let them stretch. Why yeah, the last set I bought from you was perfect. It let my wings out and was light enough not to slow me down. Welf's eyes widened in shock as he let out a wide grin. White wings, eh? Who would have thought Arario's rising star was wearing my armor all this time? You'll be Bell Cranel, right? So then, you bought my Pyankichi Mark II, right? Glad to see you've got a good eye for equipment. The young devil had to stifle a grimace at the naming scheme as he replied. Thank you. Do you have anything else like it? The smith gained the same look that the tailors had when Bell asked if he had anything in stock for Lily. This kind of stuff isn't exactly made to fit, you know. Say, how about signing a contract with me? Bell's confused expression told him that he needed to elaborate, and Welf leaned forward as he kept his eyes on the hungry-looking smiths eyeing up Bell. The gist of it is you buy your armor and weapons from me, and I make your armor custom fit and your blades are to order. Gives me a steady revenue stream, and if you keep up your fame, a reputation. There's a few other benefits, like if you bring me a drop item that I can work, I can turn it into higher quality equipment. It seemed like a stroke of pure luck as Bell fervently nodded his assent. That sounds perfect, Mr. Crozzo. Welf's eyes narrowed slightly before he said softly, just call me Welf, I'm not a fan of my family name. Bell blinked before nodding curiously. Oh, okay then, Welf. Call me Bell please in turn. Sorry, but how fast can you make my armor? I'm really excited, sorry. The smith seemed surprised for a second before he grinned and replied, clapping his hands together before extending one to Bell who took it happily. Give me a day and you'll be looking at Bell Cranel's new armor. Glad to do business with you. Now, onto a final matter of business. Do you mind taking me along in your battle party? Bell asked why as he stood up again, the two beginning to walk towards the elevators. Welf explained as they began to leave Babel. When a smith reaches level 2, they can choose the smith ability. It allows us to infuse weapons and armor with traits, which lets them make first-class equipment. I'm still level 1, and Jefe Isto's familiar requires that ability at least before a smith can mark equipment with the familiar's branding. Bell nodded in understanding before replying gratefully. That sounds great, we've been looking for another member. Lily's going to be happy at least. Oh, shall I find her and introduce you? Welf shook his head with a grin as they entered the courtyard. Nah, I want to dedicate myself to your armor. Say, are you willing to join me for a bit? I want to size you up. Can't let my first custom job not fit, eh? They made their way to a rundown shack and Bell stepped inside, looking around curiously. It looked like the blacksmith shop back at his old village, but that place only produced farming implements and nails. Here, there were all sorts of great swords and short swords laying around. Welf was getting some rudimentary measuring equipment ready before Bell asked curiously, Excuse me, can I try one of these swords out? Now Welf looked properly surprised as he nodded his assent. Bell took down the largest sword and carefully sized it up before sighing and setting it back. Sorry, it's just that large monsters can give me a bit of trouble with my knife. Looks like I'm not cut out for these kinds of weapons. The smith began to take Bell's measurements with a marked tape, his eyes roving over his body analytically as he replied warily. Your knife. I was told that it had some weird property to it. Where'd you get it? Bell gulped as he replied. It was a gift from my fiancé, Ria's Gremory. It's called the Nephilim's Tooth, and it converts demonic power to divine power and vice versa when I cut someone, and it won't cut anyone I care for. I think Ria's said it was made by someone called Emakuni. Suddenly Welf's eyes lit up in a grin as he exclaimed. Now that's a smith. That's one hell of a blessing on your hip, don't forget that. Bell laughed good-naturedly as he asked curiously. You sound like you admire him a lot. Welf put away the tape, apparently content with his measurements as he set about heating up the forge. Amakuni is kind of an inspiration for a lot of the smiths in the Goibnu familiar, though he has his admirers here. His no Hephaistos, but every blade he makes is a companion to its wielder, not just an extension. They have their own will, their own life, and it's kind of inspiring that they stick by their wielder even though they are magical. His expression turned contemplative as he began to heat up a large billet of white metal. I'm not a fan of magic swords. I'm kind of surprised you came to me and didn't want one. The Crozo name isn't exactly unknown. Bell tilted his head curiously before Welf just laughed it off, though a small sad twinge remained in his eyes as he said conclusively, staring into the fires of the forge. I don't think it's a story for me to tell, but needless to say, I'm not a fan of them. Besides, I don't need to make magical weapons to become a great smith. Now, sorry, but I'll need my concentration for this. Meet you at the base of Babel midday. The boy nodded and bade goodbye to the odd, passionate smith he'd just met. Walking home as the sun began to set, Belle entered the dining room to see Lily sitting at the table with a mug in front of her as well as a sack of gold. Sitting down next to her, she said sympathetically, "Did you not find anything, Master Bell?" Bell grinned as he shook his head. "No, even better. I met the smith who made my old set, and we even signed a contract. His name's Welf Crozo, and he's making me a custom set of armor." Lily laughed at his exuberance as Riaz raced into the room to sit next to him. "Bell, how was the dungeon today? Where have you been?" This was surprising. Usually she wasn't as worked up these days when he was late home. Setting a hand on hers, he gave her a calming smile and replied brightly, "I was just telling Lily, I formed a contract with a smith." Riaz sighed in relief as she sat down next to him while Lily pondered the name. "Crozoha. So, he's making your armor. That's good to hear, Master Bell. You suited your old set." Bell nodded before grinning apologetically. Oh, and he'll be joining our battle party, Lily." She blinked in surprise before sighing with a bittersweet grin. "You're making me look bad, Master Bell, though good job. That will solve our armor, weaponry, and party member problems." Bell flushed at the praise as Riaz began. "Well, Bell, I got your name today." He turned to her excitedly, and she replied with an apologetic grin. "Rookie Rabbit." Suddenly his expression turned morose, remembering Riza's gloating insults before Riaz giggled and pulled him into an embrace. "Oh, come on, Bell, it's so cute. You are kinda like a little rabbit anyways, all soft and fluffy." As she said this, she nuzzled into his hair while Bell tried to escape, very aware that Lily was watching. Eventually the girl growled angrily and grabbed onto his free arm and hugged it tightly. "Hey, Master Bell is more cool than cute. You should see him down in the dungeons." Lily and Riaz locked eyes before they seemed to come to a silent understanding. Of course, this lasted until Aquino's voice piped up from behind as she draped her arms over Bell's shoulders and leaned down to whisper in his ear. "I disagree. His defining quality is just how delectable he looks when he's sleeping." Bell's mind short-circuited as Lily and Riaz nodded in begrudging agreement. Riaz sighed in mock disappointment as she commented, "I thought his resistance to getting teased was getting better. Looks like us three still have a lot to teach him." At that, Lily blinked in surprise before asking nervously, quite intimidated by the obstacles between her and her seniors. Riaz, are you sure? I'm not exactly cut out for dash." Suddenly she was hushed as Aquino looked at her disapprovingly. "Lily, you're more than cut out for this. Actually, I'm a little envious. After all, you do have a certain trump card." The prum looked herself over, wondering what she was talking about before Aquino leaned down to whisper in her ear suggestively. "Cinderella is still in its infancy, correct? Just think what will happen if you manage to become a doppelganger of Riaz or I. Imagine him, laying on his bed, as we send him to heaven while he doesn't know who is who." Lily shuddered at the mental image before replying breathlessly. But I can't do anything bigger than myself." Aquino frowned and began warmly. "Well, as your queen, I can't let that stop us. I am the fallen angel after all. Perhaps with a bit of training the parameters will change. I know that Ria's power of destruction has changed a lot over the years, as has my magic. Pawns are known for their versatility after all." That sent Lily into a spiral of daydreams as Aquino smiled sadistically, knowing she'd planted a seed in the girl's mind. Stepping back, she was about to sit down before there was a knock at the door. Going to see who it was, Aquino opened the door to reveal a rather surprising arrival. "Heya!" It was Tiona, Ais, and Riveria, the last of which was holding a bottle of nondescript wine. "Oh, to what do we owe this visit?" Rivera sighed at Hajune's lack of professionalism and began formally. "Himajima, may we speak to Miss Gremory?" Aquino's eyes narrowed as she saw the peace offering in her hands. She'd heard exactly what had happened on Bell and Ria's date, and had to be calmed before she went off to give the goddess a piece of her mind. Of course. They stepped inside as Aquino led them towards the office and motioned for them to sit down before going off to get Rias. AIS was looking around curiously as Tiona happily bounced in her seat while Reveria sighed in annoyance. Eventually Aquino returned, Rias in tow as the girl looked over at them in surprise. Loki familiar, it's odd to see you here. How are you three? Tiona waved back with a grin before AIS spoke up with an expectant look at Tiona. Where's Belle? Rias giggled before turning to Aquino. Go and get those two, I'm sure Belle will be glad to see them. Aquino left the room again before Reveria began formally. We're here on 2 points of business. The first, an apology from myself and our captain, Finn. We recently learned about our goddess' behavior, and we would like both yourself and Mr. Cranel to understand that we do not condone her actions. There was a long moment as Reveria presented the bottle before Rias spoke up knowingly. So, Daimler is still aiming for Koneko. The elf's expression turned a bit strained for a second before Rias sighed and took the bottle, replying apologetically. I'm sorry, that was uncalled for. But he should know that it's her place to forgive him, not mine. Reveria shook her head as she explained. Not just Tuju, he has had his eye on Cranel ever since his first meeting him, and after Tiona and AIS trained him, he was rather interested in having him for an expedition. The devil's eyes widened as the final 2 members of the peerage walked in with Aquino, and AIS stood up abruptly as Belle laughed nervously. Oh, hello everyone. The girl walked over and stared directly into his eyes, making him sweat beneath the collar as he remembered training with her before she nodded and said, You did. Good. Well done. He gulped as he looked over at the astonished Rias only as she asked curiously. Trained him? What do you mean? Aquino explained the circumstances that lead to the training for the rating game they had assumed would occur, and by the time she was finished, Rias had a contemplative look on her face. So that's why you were at the ceremony, Highroot. If so, I indirectly owe his victory to you too. You went against the wishes of your goddess for Belle and I. Tiona waved her off with a grin. Oh, it's no problem. Old Argonaut here is pretty cool, and he's a good drinking buddy. On the subject, how about we crack open that soma? Rias opened the bottle and Belle was surprised by just how delicious the wine smelled, though Lily wrinkled her nose as she muttered something about a failure. Rias poured glasses for assembled, sans Lily who politely declined, and they began to drink. Once the first sip had been taken, Reveria began with a small smile on her face. Now, we also had another proposition for Mr. Cranel here. Is it true that you have yet to defeat the Goliath floor boss and make it to Rivera? Belle nodded curiously as Reveria continued, her wine glass placed delicately between her fingers. Well, Finn and I were debating on sending an auxiliary party to slay the Goliath. This would be led by our own Raoul Nord, and we formally extend an invitation for you to join said party. He was quite surprised by this, and he voiced as much as Ria's expression turned wary. She was still on edge from Freya's comment, and this may be a subtler approach to get at Koneko. Why me? Loki Familia has a lot of strong adventurers. Tiona picked up from there, leaning forward as she downed the wine before smacking her lips. Yeah, but we've also got a lot of 3rd and 2nd class. Raoul is a level 4, and if we can avoid it, he won't be assisting in the fight. This is supposed to help bring some of our weaker members up to speed when it comes to fighting as a unit. They also need to learn how to work with mercenary forces. The Jefe Istos Familia didn't have much kind to say to our goddess after our last expedition with them. Belle nodded in understanding. So you want Lily and I to help? Reveria turned to the prum girl, blinking in surprise when she remembered the girl from the irregular Minotaur incident. Oh, certainly. It would be a good idea for our logistics team to learn how to manage outside forces too. In any case, the Goliath has already been killed, so we have approximately 9 days until the expedition is set to take place. We've already put down an intent to suppress notice to the guild, so there shouldn't be any interference from other parties. Now then, do you accept? He looked over to Rias questioningly, only for her to tilt her head in his direction, deferring to him. Thinking it over, he eventually came to his decision. I'd like to join, please. She nodded with a smile before finishing her wine, saying in conclusion, Well then, I guess that will be all. Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Cranel. I'll tell Raoul to expect you at Twilight Manor. They will set off at 10 in the morning. Miss Gremory, thank you for your hospitality. Reveria walked outside, leaving AIS and Tiona who was still grinning up at Belle. Hey Argonaut, want to go for a drink? Mamma Mia's starting to get pissed that you haven't shown up for a celebration. Belle blanched before agreeing with a nod, ready to lose a good portion of his day's earnings as Tiona snickered at his expression. He began to walk off with her as AIS stood and followed silently before turning back to Riaz with an apologetic grin. I guess I'll be eating out tonight. Riaz giggled before waving him off. I guess you are. Have a nice night, honey. He flushed at the pet name as Tiona's laughter became uproarious. They left the peerage's house, and Bell was surprised when he felt a hand touch his wing. The fingers were cool and lithe, and he had to stifle a moan as they sent shivers of electricity down them. He turned, still reeling from the touch, to see AIS touching them curiously. AISTT that's dash. His protests were cut off as Tiona did the same to the opposing wing, and he could help but let out a small yelp as she did the same thing with a conspiratorial grin on her face. Oh, are these things ticklish? Coochie coochie coo. Belle began to flush red as she began to tickle the appendages. They began to flap erratically before he was suddenly leaping through the air after catching a particularly good headwind. Stumbling out of the embarrassing display, he turned his back to them to hide his wings as Tiona laughed at his expression. However, AIS was busy looking at him with a thoughtful expression. Belle, why don't you fly? The boy blinked in surprise before replying sheepishly. I haven't tried yet. Should I? AIS nodded as she explained. The Goliath is tall, and being able to reach its neck and head is important. Since you use a dagger, you should look into it. Bell nodded thoughtfully before giving his wings a few tentative flaps. They didn't seem to do much until he began to properly focus on them, and suddenly he was hovering a few inches from the ground as his wings beat rhythmically. Whoa. This is amazing. Suddenly a rock was sent flying at him by Tiona, and he had to dodge to the side, sending him crashing to the ground with a groan as she cackled and replied. Well, I think you'll need some practice before you can use it in a fight. But that's badass Argonaut. Hey, gimme a ride sometime, okay? Belle blushed as they began to walk towards the tavern. When they arrived, night had already set, and they walked inside only for Belle to be immediately greeted by a worried Syr. Belle. I heard about the duel. That was amazing. Oh, Miss Hyrute, Miss Wallenstein. Please, allow me to seat you three. Don't think you're getting out of telling me everything, Belle. He gulped as Tiona snickered. They were seated, and Belle was surprised when, without even ordering, a frankly massive mug of ale was set in front of him by a darkly grinning Mamma Mia. So, think you can push back an invitation from me? That's a hell of a set you've got on you, kid. Gremory's lucky. To the married man. Liu, get him everything on the menu. Belle shivered in fear as Tiona laughed in amusement while Ai's expression turned shocked. Married? He nodded, pulling the small barrel over to him in resignation of his fate. Why yeah, it was the only way I could save Riaz. Tiona laughed as she threw an arm around her junior, though she was a level behind AIS after the girl had hit level 6. Don't tcha worry about that AIS. Us Amazons and devils practice polyamory. Hey, Argo, how's it work in devil culture? Us Amazons just try to fight for the strongest men in the area, and if they are worth it, we'll share. Belle shivered as AIS' expression turned contemplatively. Oh, Riaz said a high C-class devil can take multiple wives if the girls are okay with it. The Amazoness nodded thoughtfully as she replied curiously, not noticing as Syr walked up behind her. Huh, that's pretty cool. I swear, these humans are so prudish, am I right? Hey, if you ever manage to catch up to me, I'll let you add me. There was a long moment of silence in the bar as what she just exclaimed set in. After a few seconds, Belle just looked down into his mug, lifted it to his mouth, drank for longer than he perhaps needed to before setting it down and replying with a healthy blush on his cheeks and a nervous smile on his face. I'll keep that in mind. Thanks for your consideration. Tiona giggled as Syr slammed down the first of their meals onto the table before walking away, careful not to show anything other than her service smile to Belle until she turned her head. Say, AIS, would you let Argonaut collect you too? We could be sister wives. Belle was shocked when AIS didn't immediately discount the idea, but instead mulled it over for a second before a small blush covered her cheeks. I'd consider it. Now that was surprising. Deciding that he just wasn't drunk enough to understand the intricate way she was letting him down, Belle continued to drink until he was nigh forced to eat something by Syr, though devils were pretty resistant to getting drunk at the best of times. Eventually the three had managed to force their way through most of the food, and Tiona looked quite drunk as she slurred out the lyrics to some song from her home country. Eventually she passed out, snoring contentedly as her head rested on the table while AIS swayed from side to side. Belle smiled ruefully before flagging down Syr as she collected plates from around the quiet tavern. Excuse me, SYR. Can these two get a room for tonight? SYR turned to him in surprise before giving him a small smile. Of course, I'll put it on the bill. Will you be staying with them? Belle laughed nervously as he replied. And no, I'll go home once they are asleep. AIS petulantly smacked the table as she said. No, Bunny stays with me. He sighed as the girl swayed again, only just catching herself before she fell off her chair. I'll take Tiona up. Can you lead me, please? SYR laughed as Belle picked up the Amazonas in a bridal carry, leading him to a room as he tried to stop AIS from straying out of the tavern, slurring out something about fighting bad bunnies in the dungeon. Oh, looks like someone's getting a head start on that harem. Belle groaned as SYR opened a door for him, and he brought the two girls inside. Setting Tiona on one of the beds, he was sure to tuck her in on her side in case she vomited before turning to AIS, who was clumsily stumbling towards her own bed. Helping her under the covers, Belle was about to turn and leave before AIS called out pitifully. Bedtime story. He stopped in his tracks as SYR laughed at his expression. What kind? AIS lifted the covers to her mouth as she replied in a serious voice. Bunnies. Belle sighed as he walked over, extending out his wings as he said apologetically. I don't know many stories about rabbits, sorry. But once upon a time, there was a dragon in a far-off land. It made the water sour with smoke, and crops died under where it flew. One day, the son of a king resolved to kill the dragon for his country and set out after it. Oh, she was already sleeping, a contented smile on her face as she snoozed. Belle stood up and turned only to find himself pressed against a wall by SYR. She had a certain look on her face that he had only seen on Aquino's when she was particularly sadistic, and the waitress whispered into his ear. You know, girls love a guy who's good with children. Keep that up, and I think we could get our own room. Before he could respond with an attempt at a response, SYR ran her finger down his chest, turned around and walked away, leaving him stunned as she swayed her hips. Eventually he stumbled back down into the bar and sat at his table as SYR disappeared into the kitchens. Anya, another of the waitresses, gave him his bill, paying the requisite 20,000 valis, a price that would have made him balk if him and Lily didn't do so well with her being able to update her status. He was surprised when Anya said with a mischievous grin, "Now you'd best be careful with SYR's hiat, you know. You can get pretty defensive of hire." Belle gulped before turning to leave, the warning in his mind. What was she talking about? It wasn't as if he was trying to break SYR's heart. Chapter 11. The sound of orcs roaring in the 11th floor could be heard as Welf and Lily stood back, watching in awe as what could only be described as a flying ball of knife and excitement jumped between monsters. Now, Lily had known that these monsters were easy prey for her master Belle, but considering how much easier it was for him to reach their heads when he incorporated short bursts of gliding and flaps of air, it was like he was just fighting tall goblins. Welf whistled in surprise as he noted with a grin. Man, this guy not leaving any for ourselves. Lily didn't respond, instead raising her crossbow and firing a bolt into one of the imps that had tried to sneak up on them. Meanwhile, Welf noticed another pair of eyes behind them and slashed down his great sword into another imp. You can say that again. Though I must commend you, Mr. Crozzo, your armor is impeccable. Indeed, it had been. In the morning when Belle, Lily, and Welf had met at the entrance to Babel, the boy's eyes had lit up like magic stones when he saw the box Welf had been carrying. In short order it had been put on, and Belle could say without a doubt that he didn't regret signing a contract with the young man. Light, durable, and with two openings that allowed his wings through while protecting the rest of his back, the Pionkichi's latest iteration was a firm success in Belle's eyes. The boy finished off the final orc with a firebolt to the face before using its body to jump off, skidding to a halt next to them with wide, dilated eyes. Welf, this armor is amazing. It's like I'm wearing nothing at all. Lily's eyes widened at his phrasing, and she quickly excused herself to collect the magic stones as Welf grinned in appreciation, rubbing the back of his head. Speak for yourself. Your skills are incredible. I've got to say, I feel kinda useless. Belle shook his head, leaning up against the wall as he assured him. Of course not. I feel much better knowing Lily has someone to keep her safe. Not to mention we'll need you in the middle floors. The smith agreed before asking curiously. Say, we're getting a lot of drop items today. Is that normal? It was true, there were a lot of drop items in the hall today, but that had become the standard for them ever since he'd leveled up. Oh, I have a developmental skill called luck. Riaz thinks it has something to do with chance, so maybe that's why. Welf nodded, near salivating at the idea of having access to that many drop items. That's one hell of a skill. You should head to the pleasure quarter and try your luck at the casinos. Bell tilted his head curiously. He vaguely recalled that name from somewhere, though he couldn't quite place it. Pleasure quarter. The young adult's eyes widened before he grinned knowingly, throwing an arm around Bell's shoulders in a brotherly way. Oh, do I have the place for you? The pleasure quarter has everything from bars, casinos, special herbalists to more adult pursuits. I'd take you there, but I don't think your missus would be too happy with me. He cottoned on and paled, muttering back nervously. I don't think I'm cut out for that. I can barely keep up at home. Welf laughed and slapped him on the back. No worries. I'll take you out drinking there sometime once you're older. No point in not living a little, eh? We're in Orario after all. Bell laughed along nervously. Eventually Lily was finished with her chore and returned, her cheeks still slightly red as she cleared her throat and began. Shall we continue then? Mr. Crozzo. Master Bell. Welf gritted his teeth and rubbed the back of his head. Look, Lily, I'd really rather you not call me that. Mr. Welf if you must, but I'm not a fan of my family name. Suddenly Lily's eyes widened as she said breathlessly. Crozzo. The Raycane Royal Smiths. I knew your name was familiar. Welf winced as Bell asked curiously, not understanding her epiphany. What do you mean, Lily? That made both turn to him in surprise before Welf sighed and explained shortly. My family can make magic swords of a high quality, though the ability has been dormant for generations until me. I really don't want to make them, so let's just. Look, I was excited when I found someone looking for my armor, not a magic sword. Can we just drop it? Bell blinked in surprise before nodding as Lily nodded uncomfortably, still startled by the revelation. Okay, sorry, Welf. They began to move again, killing monsters on the way until they eventually found themselves in the 13th floor. Lily had suggested that they just take this day to get accustomed to the feeling of working as a unit, and they weren't planning on going any further. As they got used to the idea of a 3-person cell, Bell suddenly looked around as a rumbling was heard throughout the dungeon. Guys, what is that? Lily was on guard, keeping her crossbow leveled at a hellhound until her eyes spotted something coming from down a long corridor. It was a party, 5 in number, though one of them was clearly injured and being carried by a large man leading the charge. Oh no. Pass parade. Bell's heart sank as he recalled the term, the rumbling getting closer. The party in question began to run by them, and Bell could see one of them, a girl with long black hair, begging them for forgiveness with teary eyes as they dashed past. The monsters began to run towards them, and Bell looked between Lily and Welf for a second before gritting his teeth and yelling, Lily, get on. He ran to the girl and she quickly scrambled onto his back as the 3 began to run in the same direction. Lily fired bolts at the hellhounds that were launching fireballs at them, and Bell yelled to the terrified Welf. Welf, once we're in a long corridor, take Lily from me and I'll handle them. The smith looked at him like he was insane before Bell gave him a grin, reassuring him. Swallowing his fear, he continued to run as he noticed the sound of bells chiming echoing through the halls. They reached a long, straight corridor and Bell yelled as the chimes began to get louder and louder, sparks of red launching off his body as a white light began to glow in his hands. No. Welf grabbed Lily and wrenched her off Bell's back just before the boy turned, his palm extended towards the oncoming parade as his wings extended to shield the 2 hiding behind him from the blast. Firebolt. There was a final chime before a massive ball of plasma engulfed all of the monsters, searing them down to their cores until naught was left but their magic stones and drop items. Bell gasped for air as he took a knee while Lily screamed in worry. Master Bell. Are you okay? What was that? He smiled up at her as he replied. Argonaut, and my skill. I overcharged a firebolt while we were running and it worked, right? Lily didn't say anything apart from throwing her arms around his neck, shaking slightly as Bell tried to comfort her. Welf gasped for air as he whispered, looking out at the destruction in awe. Man, devils really are something else. Bell nodded, still exhausted as he stood up with Lily. They began to make their way out of the dungeon, Welf keeping on point considering how exhausted Bell was. Even as they begun to enter the upper levels, Bell couldn't help but feel as if he was being watched, like the dungeon itself was keeping an eye on him. Even as they arrived in the ground floor of Babel, he still felt something was off as they went about cleaning themselves up before meeting up again in the courtyard. Lily took off her backpack and looked down at the contents before looking up to Welf with a nod. Shall we split the loot tomorrow or do you want to come with us to the guild? Welf shook his head and asked. Sorry, But do you think I could take some of those drop items? I've not worked with them that much, and I want to try my hand at it. She looked up at Belle with a question in her eyes before Belle nodded, motioning to the backpack. Please, take your pick. Welf rummaged around in the large pack for a moment before pulling out a few assorted pelts and claws with a grin. This'll be perfect. Thanks, you too. Tomorrow in the morning. They bade goodbye to the smith as the two began to walk towards the guild. Lily began in an unconvinced voice, crossing her arms with a pout. I'm not sure about him yet, Master Belle. Belle laughed at her expression before replying with a small grin. Well, we didn't have the greatest start. Let's give him a chance, okay? Lily huffed as they continued into the guild hall, and her expression soured further as a certain half-elf waved excitedly over to Belle. He went over as Lily went to exchange their stones, and Aina greeted him warmly. Belle, how was adventuring today? Everything go well? He gulped as he recounted the events, and Aina's expression turned violent as she muttered. Past parades. I swear, some adventurers have no honor. I'm glad none of you got injured, or worse. So, Aina's expression turned a bit mischievous as she continued teasingly. How's married life? Belle yelped as Aina giggled. She was well aware of Devil's propensity for polyamory, and if what her co-workers said was true, the Gremarys were more than willing to allow for such acts. While she wasn't exactly thrilled about the idea, she was glad that the cute young adventurer she'd begun to crush on was still available when he grew up a bit. We won't be married for 4 months or so. She grinned as she continued. Oh, that's a shame. Remember to send me an invitation to the ceremony. Okay. Belle made his retreat over to Lily as Aina waved him off. She picked up the large sack of gold as she reported with a grin. 40,000. Not bad for a half day. So, Master Belle, is there anything else to do today? He hummed in thought before offering curiously. Well, we're setting off in a week with the Loki familiar, so we don't need to go deeper. Do you have anything you want to do, Lily? She shrugged, setting the gold in her bag before snapping her fingers, getting an idea. See, could you teach me how to fly, Master Belle? I saw you do it a lot today, and it could be useful to keep myself out of danger. He blinked in surprise before nodding, scratching his cheek with a sheepish smile as he replied. Sure, but I'm not the best at it just yet. Arriving home, Lily dropped off her backpack quietly since Riaz was probably still working before joining Belle outside the door. It was a quiet street just outside of Daedalus Street, so thankfully nobody was around, and Belle began with a stammer as Lily unfurled her wings. He had never voiced the opinion, but he had always thought she looked quite striking with her wings out. So, let's start with flapping. I can hover a little, though it's harder to turn quickly in the air without a jumping point. Lily nodded and her wings began to flap softly as Belle watched her cautiously. As they began to move a little quicker, her feet began to lift from the ground as Lily shouted excitedly. Look, Master Belle, I've got it. Just as she did so, she changed her balance slightly and accidentally went tumbling towards him. Belle caught her before she hit the ground and asked worriedly, Lily, are you okay? Unbeknownst to him, she was just busy enjoying the feeling of his arms around her back and she warmth emanating from him. Lily sighed in delight as his hand cupped the back of her head before she decided that here wasn't the place to indulge. I'm fine, Master Belle, thank you for catching me. Let's try again. She was released, but Belle held onto her hands as he said encouragingly. That was a good attempt, Lily. I'll keep you stable, so just focus on hovering, okay? Lily's face flushed but she soldiered through, eventually hovering again. She was gripping onto Belle's hands tightly, partly to keep herself stable and partly for the part of her that was screaming like a lovesick girl in her mind. They walked around a little bit before Belle let go of her hands, and Lily got a feel for flying though she missed the contact. I think I've got it, Master Belle. He grinned excitedly as he also began to hover next to her, enjoying the feeling of flight as he followed her motions. You've done it, Lily. Isn't it great? She had to admit, the feeling of flying really was a liberating one. Master Belle, can we try going higher? Belle blinked before nodding excitedly, his wings letting out a powerful gust of wind as he propelled himself into the air. Lily followed him at a more sedate pace, but Belle was already performing loops in the air with loud whoops of excitement. Master Belle, slow down. He just laughed and fired off another large flap, rocketing across Rio. Lily followed him as quick as she could though she was starting to get tired. Eventually she began to feel her wings give out, and she gasped when she realized exactly how high she was. She began to fall, and her screams attracted attention from the ground as the people below tried to figure out a way to stop her fall. Just as Lily thought she was about to die, a blur of white caught her, and she cracked open her eyes to see a grinning Belle looking down at her apologetically. Sorry, Lily. Are you okay?" She sighed in relief before glaring up at him and pinching his side, eliciting a yelp of pain from the boy as she called over the wind. "That was mean, Master Belle. When I said slow down, I meant it." He pouted before sighing and replying apologetically. "I'm sorry, Lily. I shouldn't have. See, can I make it up to you?" Lily was surprised. She hadn't expected this from him, though she wasn't about to let such a perfect opportunity go to waste. Snuggling into his arms, she replied with a grin as she wrapped her arms around his neck. "Well, I'd like to see what it's like at your speed." Belle's expression turned excited as his wings sent them rocketing through the air again as Lily screamed in a mixture of delight and terror. After a series of loops, rolls and glides, they came to a stop at the peerage house, and a panting Belle set down Lily as she grinned up at him. "That was incredible, Master Belle. Can we do that again?" He wiped some sweat from his forehead as he replied with a vigorous nod. "Of course. Wow, flying is amazing." They stepped inside only to see Riaz tapping her foot with a raised eyebrow. "So, where have you two been? I don't suppose that blur in the sky was yourself, Belle." He gulped as Riaz looked him up and down before she gripped the bridge of her nose. "You are such a child sometimes, though I guess I can't blame you. Head up to my room. There's a bathroom you can use to clean yourself up." Belle nodded and rushed away as Aquino walked out to join her while Lily shuffled around nervously. Ria's expression softened as she asked with a grin, "So, how was it?" The supporter's eyes widened as she asked nervously, "Wait, you're not mad?" Riaz giggled as she replied fondly, "Of course not, but he is pretty cute when he's nervous. Not to mention, it is my bathroom." As if on cue, Belle let out a scream as Ria's expression turned mischievous. "I can sometimes leave my underwear in there, whoops." Lily laughed at the idea before replying with a small smile. It was nice, really nice. He can be a bit daring for my liking though." Riaz nodded before Aquino offered kindly, "Lily, do you want to begin training your magic with me? I'm certain you've had enough flight practice today." Lily bobbed her head excitedly and followed Aquino up the stairs and into the Queen's room. Riaz sighed with a smile, wondering exactly when her peerage had become so lively before she decided to have a bit more fun. Walking up to her room, she heard the shower going and lay down on the bed. Eventually Belle was done with his shower and walked out, only in a towel since his clothes needed to be laundered, and yelped when he saw Riaz. The girl nodded to him with a smile before asking, "Belle, once you're dressed could you come back here?" He blinked in surprise before nodding his assent and leaving for his own room. He returned quickly in another pair of his clothes and sat down next to Riaz, only for the girl to pull him down onto the mattress. Riaz." She giggled as she wrapped her arms around him. "What? Not interested, even a little?" While she was saying this in jest, there was an underlying tone of fear. Fear that he was just doing his job as a knight, that he didn't actually have any real affection for her. Belle didn't notice, however, and gulped nervously. I can't say I don't enjoy it, but why?" Riaz sighed contentedly as she replied with a small voice. "Well, I guess I just like this. Me, together. I'd like to do more like it, but sorry, I shouldn't be pushing you. You've put yourself on the line for me and dash." She was cut off as Belle began apologetically, albeit a little shakily. He didn't look embarrassed per se, but he was uncertain. "Riaz, I do love you, but it's just, I don't deserve this." The girl's eyes widened as Belle explained, averting his eyes from making contact with hers. "I like this, but when I compare myself to you, I feel weak, and uncultured, and out of my depth. Do you get it? It's like IIVE and not worked hard enough yet." Riaz suddenly gained a softness in her eyes as she looked down at her favorite idiot. Even after he'd saved her, even after she'd declared that she wanted him, he didn't know if he deserved her. With a new perspective on the situation, Riaz held him closer as she said forcefully, "Belle, I have a new rule." He didn't reply, and Riaz took that as her cue to continue. "You sleep in my room from now on. If I hear you reject me for any reason whatsoever, especially stupid ones like that, then we sleep naked." Belle's breath hitched as Riaz whispered angrily, though without any heat, "It's not your place to tell me who I can and can't love, Belle, just like it isn't mine to tell you. Don't you dare act like you're inferior to me, Aquino, Koneko, or even Lily. You are one of us, a devil of Gremory, and even if I tease you sometimes, I'm still pretty new to it all myself. So just deal with it, okay?" Belle gulped before replying softly, a small smile on his face. "Oh, okay, Riaz, I'll try." But do we have to sleep together? She giggled excitedly as she pulled him closer, like a stuffed animal. Yep. You make for an excellent hug pillow, you know. Besides, you'll do your best if you sleep well, right? He had to admit, the morning after he woke up with Ria's he did feel quite energized. Nodding his head a final time, Belle whispered, "Okay, but if I'm back late." Ria's replied, not missing a beat. "Then just be quiet and get under the covers. You're not getting out of this, Belle." Realizing his fate was sealed, Belle fell silent and allowed himself to enjoy the feeling. A few minutes, or possibly hours passed before Belle whispered, Ria's. All that greeted him with a light snoring, and he realized that the girl had fallen asleep. Turning over, trying not to disturb her, Belle smiled down at her as she nuzzled into his chest with a dopey smile. Wrapping her in his arms, he closed his eyes as well, beginning to fall asleep, any thoughts of dinner pushed to the side. Eventually Aquino walked into the room and smiled when she saw the two curled up together. Debating for a second, she walked over and decided not to interrupt them but did pull the curtains around the four-poster bed, leaving them hidden from view. She'd have her turn with Belle eventually, but seeing her best friend like this had a certain charm. The next day Lily gaped in surprise when she saw Welf walking towards them, a large backpack on his back along with his sword. He arrived next to her and Belle and pulled it off and presented it to the girl with a grin. "So, what do you think, Lil Lily?" She took it with large eyes and inspected it. It was made of the pelts from the hellhounds they'd killed the day before, and it had an arched form that would allow her wings to stretch out. "Is this for me?" Welf grinned as he also handed over a vambrace with a small crossbow similar to her old one, but it had the same style of work as the Pionkichi armor. The fangs taken from the hole made up the bow's limbs, and Lily was surprised when she felt the impressive draw weight on it. Yep, the Pionkichi supporter set. I noticed how much Belle here needed his wings, and I reckon that little bowl do you some good when it comes to tougher armor. So, DYA like it? She looked it over in awe for a second before nodding and replying. "This is good equipment. Thank you, Welf. Master Belle, can you take my old stuff home? I might need it if this becomes damaged." Belle nodded, taking the bracer and the backpack before extending his wings and flying off into the air as Welf and Lily shielded their faces from the blast of wind. Welf sighed as he sat down and said with a distant look, "Look, Lil Lily, I won't lie, I know you're not a fan of me." Lily sighed before sitting up next to him, her wings extending out gratefully from the new backpack. "Please don't take it personally, I've had bad experiences with adventurers right up until I met Master Belle. I've gotten used to working him, and I guess I'm worried that something out of our control will take him away." The smith looked down at her with a quirked eyebrow before snorting and replying, "Looks like that makes two of us. I'm not too much a fan of other adventurers myself. But Belle's a good kid. He signed me just like that when I asked him. I promise, I'll do my best to make good armor and weapons for you too." Lily smiled at his promise before replying with a small grin. "Just don't get in my way. Even if he's got our mistress, I intend to claim my own piece of his heart." Welf laughed at her proclamation as he replied, "We're more similar than I thought. I've got a girl I've got my eyes on, and what a girl she is. Looks like that's him." Sure enough, Belle touched down next to them, and they made their way into the dungeons. However, today was a lot more different than the day before. The dungeon seemed almost desperate, like it was focusing on Belle himself. Lily and Welf didn't have to do much since Belle had gotten much better at his vertical fighting, and by the time they hit the 15th floor, he'd even taken half of a stamina potion. Phew, looks like it'll be a good haul today. That was the second Minotaur horn. Welf was grinning ear to ear as he watched Lily drop the horn into her new backpack. "You can say that again. Man, I can't wait to get back to my forge, though I do need to get some adamantine." Belle laughed at his excitement as Lily pulled the bag onto her back again and turned back to them. 200 magic stones, upper-level drop items, and a good handful of middle-floor ones. "Master Belle, and may I have some of that potion?" He blinked in surprise before noticing how desperate Lily seemed to get her hands on the stuff. Unhooking it from his belt, he passed it over worriedly. "Lily, should we head back up?" "I don't know if Dash," the girl downed it excitedly, her face blushing excitedly as her wings flapped erratically. Lowering the vial, she grinned and replied while tossing the empty vial in her backpack. "Nope, I'm full of energy now. Let's see if we can't get to 300, Master Belle." Belle laughed as he took point, flashing her a thumbs up as Lily skipped along behind him. Welf fell in step with her and muttered in amusement. "Using a stamina potion like that. How wasteful, Lil Lily. What would he think if he learned the reason you asked for it?" She stuck out her tongue mischievously as Belle got to work on a new herd of minotaur, keeping an eye on the beasts and leveling her new crossbow at them. Oh, he'll never know. He's too dense for that. Anyways, keep focused. If Master Belle needs help in melee, it's up to you. Welf scoffed as he watched Belle handle the monsters. He sure as hell didn't need to help his party leader considering how fast he was moving. Eventually, after a few hours and a lunch break where Welf was introduced to the toxic wonders of SYR's cooking, they decided to head back up. Lily was jingling like a wind chime as they walked outside and began to distribute the goods. Welf took a minotaur horn for himself before replying that he wanted his cut in cash, though wouldn't take any more than 20%, claiming that it would be unfair. Once the cash was exchanged, Welf's eyes widened as a bag containing 30,000 Valis was slid over to him. Whoa. Lily, sure this ain't Belle's share. The supporter looked a bit angry as Belle nervously laughed, taking a quite larger sack for himself. You think I can't count? I've been doing this for years, Welf. I think I'd know what your cut was. The smith gulped in fear before shaking his head fearfully. Lily huffed and fell into step with Belle. Come on, Master Belle, we're leaving. Belle waved to Welf as he was dragged off by Lily, evidently still stung by the accusation. Welf sighed before smiling as he looked down at the sack of cash, gripping onto it before turning to leave. Meanwhile, with Belle and Lily, the boy asked nervously, Lily, did you have to be so? Hey. He made a gesture in the air that made Lily burst out laughing. Of course not. But it does make him understand that I take my job seriously. Anyways, shall we restock, Master Belle? If the dungeon continues like this, I'd be more comfortable knowing that we had more potions on hand. They arrived at Mayak Familiar's shop, and Belle was surprised to see the god himself at the counter as Naza swept up the floor. The Chienthrope looked up in surprise before pouting accusingly. Belle, you haven't been to see me in weeks. Lord Mayak has been going hungry. Belle stiffened before Lily sighed and crossed her arms with an angry pout. That's not fair. You shouldn't wish harm on Master Belle simply so he'll come to buy your potions. Mayak laughed as Lily and Naza began to stare each other down while Belle walked over to the counter. I see your supporter is just as protective as ever, eh, Belle? So tell me, what brings you here today? Belle explained what had happened, and Mayak frowned in worry. That sounds horrible, though I'm glad it was only stamina potion you have to buy instead of something more serious. So, here to restock on those. I have a new formula that I'm sure will work for you. He nodded before continuing with a thoughtful expression. I'd like to get some other potions too, dual potions and high healing please. Mayak blinked in surprise before clapping together his hands excitedly. Brilliant. Here, 3 each. Belle nodded and Mayak rang him up. That will be 40,000 Valis. Without a word of complaint, Belle handed over the cash only for Mayak to blink in surprise. Oh my Belle, you walk around with that on you. I'm quite surprised. It seemed not a day ago you were balking at our normal healing potions. Belle laughed sheepishly as Naza gained a hungry look in her eyes. Well, ever since I've started working with Lily, I've had a lot more Valis to spend. Not to mention I've just signed a contract with a smith, so my repair costs will go down. I don't want to take chances with our health. Mayak sighed in nostalgia as he leaned on the counter, giving him a smile before saying curiously, Say, word is you got hit by a pass parade yesterday. Is that true? The adventurer blinked before nodding, knowing it was impossible to lie to a god. Why yeah, but I handled it. Is there something about it? The god nodded thoughtfully before explaining. It's a very dishonorable thing to do, and from what I hear, they're good children at heart. Please, do try to make peace with them if you can. An ally will help you much more than an enemy after all. Belle took the advice with a smile. He always had a lot of respect for the alchemist god. He turned to leave with a word of farewell before Lily called back to him. I'll meet you back at the house, Master Belle. I've got an errand to run, okay. He left, and Lily turned back to the two before taking out her pouch and blushing nervously. Naza's eyes suddenly widened before she turned to Mayak with a serious expression. My lord, please, may I assist Miss Ard? I believe this is a feminine matter. The man nodded and walked into the back of the shop where the brewing equipment was before Lily whispered beseechingly. Is there anything in here that can help me grow taller? Naza suddenly grinned as she understood exactly what the prum wanted from increased height. So, not measuring up. I have just the thing. Pulling out an elixir from behind the counter, she presented the ornate bottle to Lily and explained. Rub this into your body before sleeping, or bathe for a night in a pool with this infused into it. When you wake up, you'll be just as tall as your heart desires. Within reason. 50,000 valis. While Lily was loath to part with her money on something that she knew Belle wouldn't care too much about. Aquino had said that she had the potential to become whatever form she wanted with her Cinderella, though she was getting impatient. And besides, it was her body, she'd do whatever the hell she'd like with it. Naza slid the bottle over to Lily as she took the money before whispering with a knowing grin. It works especially well if you think of your goal while you use it, you know. The prom nodded and sighed with a rueful smile. Look at me, some lovesick idiot with a bottle of snake oil in her hand. Naza didn't seem to be bothered by the comment as she said seriously, I promise, it works. Trust me, when it comes to matters of the heart, I don't lie. Or rather, I can't. Lily caught a look of the gleaming metal underneath the Chienthrope's glove before nodding and whispering. So you hold on to hope for someone that's out of your reach also. She smiled and shook her head. Odd. Can I call you Lily? I've known Belle since he became an adventurer, and I can tell you, there's no similarities between our situations. Though I think he's a bit of an inspiration for me. I mean, if a 14-year-old kid can get with the Gremory heir, why can't I get with my own god? I'm going to keep trying, even if it means tying Lord Mayak down in a more square on the Feast of Valentine and professing my love to him in song. So, don't give up, because I reckon Belle isn't the type that likes an indecisive girl. He'd prefer someone who knows what they want. Lily laughed before gripping the potion in her hand tightly. Yeah, that does sound like him. I'll see you around. Good luck. The next day, Lily was surprised when Belle's face turned red at the sight of her, and she grinned as Aquino whistled appreciatively. She didn't have a mirror in her room, but judging from the fact that she didn't need to crane her neck to look up at Belle, it wasn't too hard to imagine the change. Her clothes felt tight on her body, and from that moment, she began to consider Mayak Familia as the premier provider of potions in Ororio. Chapter 12. Belle and Lily stood nervously in the courtyard of Twilight Manor, standing alone amongst the Loki Familia's expedition force. They'd arrived, as they had been instructed, but they were still waiting for someone to sign them on as a flustered guy that Belle didn't recognize tried to coordinate the 40-odd adventurers, supporters, and mags. Lily was huddled close to him, and Belle had a sneaking suspicion she was having doubts as she muttered scathingly. Master Belle, if these guys manage to wipe, then I'm just going to run. He blanched at the idea as he tried to calm her down. See, come on, Lily, it's not that bad. Before he could continue, there was an annoyed voice coming in front of them. They both looked up to see an elf, young and female, pointing at Belle accusingly. You're the one Miss Wallenstein is obsessing over. Stay away from her. Belle's eyes crossed as he stared in fear at the finger hovering in front of his nose. What? Lily sighed before crossing her arms. I knew this was a bad idea, Master Belle. They are just as insane as their goddess. Come on, let's go dash. Suddenly a loud voice spoke over the now muttering members of Loki Familia as they stared at Belle and Lily. Lefia. That's enough. They all turned, and Belle was surprised to see Reveria walking towards them. The elf, now known as Lefia, replied petulantly. Be but Miss Alf. This boy is the one dash. Reveria glared at her and cut her off once more with a tone of finality. He has done nothing to AIS, and her actions and interests are her own. Now, apologize. You have painted Loki Familia in a bad light. I'd compare you to Beat if I cared to insult the mutt. Lefia gulped before turning back to Belle and bowing, though he could tell she was forcing herself to do so. I'm sorry. She made her escape before Reveria sighed and turned back to them. I'm very sorry, you two. She appears to be under the delusion that AIS is her senior exclusively. Mr. Cranel, I see you've gotten some new armor. It is of good make. Ms. Ard, I have to say, you look particularly beautiful today. Lily grinned as she replied, her wings fluttering. Thanks, but please, just call me Lily. Belle nodded along with the sentiment before a bedraggled-looking teenager ran over to them, panting slightly as he bowed and said apologetically, I'm so sorry. There was an issue with our supply chains when you arrived, and I had to sort it out. Raoul Nord, Level 4, I'm leading the expedition today. Pleasure to be working with you. He extended his hand and Belle took it with a grin. It's no problem, glad to be working with you. I'm Belle Cranel, and this is Lilaruka Ard, my supporter, peerage of Ria's Gremory. He'd been drilled by Ria's on proper address when on business, and he was glad that she had, or else he might have fallen apart. He was used to working with Welf and Lily in a more laid-back 3-person cell, not a massive party like this. Raoul sighed in relief before continuing with a nod. All right, let's go sign you two in. They were led over to a desk and Raoul jotted something down on the papers before pointing Lily over to where a group of people with a large cart were lounging about. You'll be working with our support team. Your commander is Orba, the beast man in the armor. Again, thank you for signing on today. Lily walked away with one final grin to Belle before Raoul jotted something down and turned to Belle with a small grin. Sorry, but you'll be working as screening for the mage team. I know it's not the most glamorous job, but they are the executioners today. Belle waved him off with a smile. While it was disappointing to know that he wasn't supposed to fight the Goliath head-on, he knew it was necessary in case monsters came down from the 16th floor. It's no problem, I'll be sure to do my best. Raoul sighed in relief before grinning to him gratefully. I'm not going to lie, Lefia probably won't get along with you as team leader, but thank you for agreeing. Go and join the mage team, I'll get us moving soon. He walked away and Belle walked over to join the people dressed in robes and staffs. They looked at him warily, and Belle grinned nervously as he said, nice to be working with you. Lefia huffed and turned away, but the rest of them just said their unenthusiastic greetings. Belle sighed and stood there awkwardly before Raoul suddenly dinged a bell 3 times. All right everyone, we're all set, let's get moving. Follow your team leaders, and don't stop until we reach floor 1. They began to walk at a sedate pace, and Belle could see Lily walking with her hood up. Evidently, she wasn't feeling too outgoing right now, and he desperately wanted to go and speak to her, but he was constantly being watched by a vigilant Lefia. They arrived at Babel, and Belle sighed as he stretched out his wings nervously. Raoul flagged down 2 people in the guild's uniform, and Belle was surprised to see that it was in fact Aina who was speaking to him. Eventually they began to pass, and Aina caught sight of him and her eyes widened. She tried to call out to him, but he was swept along into Babel before he could reply. Lefia looked at him suspiciously as they began to venture down into the dungeons. Eventually the sound of combat could be heard from the front lines, and Belle was beginning to itch for a fight as he held his knife at his side. It was around the 12th floor when he finally got his chance, as a few orcs had slipped past the front line and were lumbering towards the mage team. Jumping at them, Belle took out 2 of them before he was suddenly sent flying backwards as a bolt of unrestrained magic came from the mage team. He glided down gently and looked at a smug Lefia like she was mad. What? Can't handle a little magic? Belle held his tongue at what he really wanted to accuse her of, but stopped just short as he muttered, "Save your mind for the Goliath." Lefia clicked her tongue in annoyance as they got moving again. As they continued down the dungeons, it was beginning to become more and more clear that she was trying to intimidate him whenever he went to kill the monsters that spawned from the walls behind them. The supporter team was in the middle, and thankfully it seemed as if they were still safe, but Belle was still missing the company of Lily as they continued down into the 16th floor. They eventually arrived at the stairs that would lead them to the 17th floor, and Belle near cried in relief when Raoul called for a break. Thankfully it seemed as if the monsters had abated for now, though they didn't know how long it would be until new ones spawned. Belle was about to walk over to the support team when suddenly he felt Lily press into his side, her face taut with annoyance. "Master Belle, I'm sorry, but I don't think I want to work with these guys again." He sighed as he nodded, gently putting an arm around her much to her surprise as he gave her a comforting hug. Yeah, maybe not for a while. When she heard that, Lefia did a small fist pump in success. Before the expedition had left, she'd gotten a stat up from her goddess and was given a special task from her. Make Belle Cranel's time as bad as it could be, so that he'd refuse to take any jobs with them again. Sure, she had her own motivation after she'd learned that the amount of time AIS had been spending away from home had directly been his fault, but this was a much better excuse. AIS couldn't even blame her for it. It was an order. Hearing that he didn't want to work with them again was music to her ears. They both found a place to sit away from the rest, and Lily took off her backpack, passing over Belle's lunch with a wrinkled nose. "I still don't understand how you can eat this stuff, Master Belle. Aquino makes much better food." Belle laughed at her continued lack of faith in SYR's cooking. "It's good, you should at least try it, Lily. Say, when we get back, how about we celebrate at the Hostess of Fertility?" Lily nodded excitedly before Raoul walked over, a nervous look on his face. "So you too, is everything okay? Any problems at all? Working well with your team leaders?" Suddenly Lefia's heart stopped as she heard those words. Oh Loki above, if Raoul learned that she'd actively been trying to make Belle's life hard, Finn'd have her by her toes, Loki say so or not. That was when she was equally surprised when Belle said, Nothing major, thank you for asking, sir." Raoul sighed as he sat down next to them, giving Belle an apologetic grin. Just call me Raoul, sir is Captain Finn. Sigh, this is exhausting. Lily still looked cautious as she near hid behind Belle, but the boy himself just rolled his shoulders and replied, Well, just have the Goliath to go, then we can rest at Riviera, right? Raoul nodded, pulling out a lunch of his own as he explained. Well, that's true, but we're hoping to get back to the surface before then. We're carrying newspapers and the like for Riviera, nothing major, but the guild asked us to do so, though some of the girls wanted to use the hot springs before we went back. Suddenly Lily's eyes went wide as Raoul nodded at the question in her eyes. They are pretty common on Riviera, though there's two main ones so we can have some privacy. Anyways, let's go over the battle plan. The forward team will be focused on keeping the Goliath busy while the mage team go for their strongest spell barrage. I've fought the thing before, and I think we'll be fine, but it relies on keeping the mags safe. Again, we're counting on you, Belle. He nodded as they continued to discuss the plan until Raoul was done with his meal. He stood up and called out to the rest of the party. Everyone, prepare to advance. Supporters, get your equipment loads from the cat and ensure that everyone has an emergency potion. Lily pressed a dual potion into Belle's hand before she stood up and dusted herself off, grinning down to him. Well, let's do our best, Master Belle. I want to get into that hot spring as soon as possible. Belle laughed at her new goal as he went to join the mage team, who Lefia was debriefing shortly. Fire your strongest stuff at it, and don't worry about the monsters. Cranel, you just do whatever it is you do. He shouldn't have expected more, but he was still kind of put out by the dismissal. The party began to move down into the 17th floor, and Belle's eyes widened in amazement as he looked up at the giant glassy wall. This must be the Wall of Sorrows, the spawning point for the Goliath. Even just staring up at it made Belle have an unsettling sense of hollowness. It was silent for a long moment until they were all in and waiting readily. Belle was on edge, his dagger out as he suddenly began to sweat. Something seemed off, like the dungeon had been waiting for this. Just as he was about to voice his concerns, the sound of shattering glass washed over them. The Wall of Sorrows now had a hand reaching out of it, fingers taller than two men end to end and black as night. It seemed to grasp at the glassy stone as the expedition force got into position, though Belle could see that they were also nervous. A leg followed, and the large figure began to emerge from the crumbling wall as Belle looked up at it in terrible awe. It was terrifying, but he held his ground as its face emerged from behind a curtain of hair. Its eyes were hollow and black as coals, and its mouth opened as a despairing scream rumbled from it. Belle held his ears, as did the rest of the party as rocks began to fall on the entrance and the exit on the far side of the room. Monsters began to crawl from the walls, small and large alike, and suddenly Belle understood that this wasn't right. They'd have warned him about this. No, this was an irregular. A black Goliath. Belle brought his palm to bear as the first of the monsters, a group of killer ants, began to rush towards the mage team. Firebolt. The streak of fire slammed into the first ant as Raoul shouted back to Lefia, the rest of the front-liners moving to engage the Goliath. Keep to the plan. Start the chant. The elf shook herself out of her fear before beginning a chant while the other mags followed suit. Belle had a tough time keeping up with the sheer number of monsters being sent out, and the supporter team was more than busy throwing out items and keeping the front lines stocked. Eventually the first volley of magic was fired off, and Belle watched in relief as the Goliath's head and upper torso were blown off. Lefia was panting as she lowered the staff, only to raise it again when it appeared as if the Goliath was regenerating. Raoul gritted his teeth before pulling out his sword, calling over the clashes of battle as the Goliath swept a few front-liners aside. Mage team, begin another volley. Frontline squad, heal and keep it distracted. They began again and Belle skidded to a halt, panting as he finished off a group of minotaurs. It was pandemonium. Supporters were cowering as Raoul tried to keep up with the monsters being spawned. The mage team were hurriedly chanting, and one of them even stammered for too long on her chant and initiated Ignis Fatuus as the frontline team tried to keep the Goliath in place. It was terrifying. If the room had been any smaller, its massive arms may have even reached the mage team. The volley of magic shot out, and Belle grit his teeth in worry as it began to regenerate again. Raoul looked at it in fear as Belle skidded to a halt next to him and shouted, uncorking his dual potion and taking in half of it. Raoul, we need a new plan. He shook his head, trying to focus before turning to Belle with wild eyes. I've never seen this before. All right, we need to regroup and heal up. See, can you? Belle nodded, his wings extending out and giving a powerful flap as Raoul bellowed the order for a full regroup. He was right in front of the Goliath's face now, and Bell could see himself reflected in its eyes as he fired a firebolt right into its gaping mouth. It howled in anguish as Bell tried to keep himself stable in the air and began darting around it. At the rest of the party below created a defensive box to handle the other monsters. Eventually Bell fell into a tailspin as he had to dodge a swipe from the Goliath and only just managed to pull out in time, stumbling to a halt in the middle of the formation. He looked over to Raoul as he panted heavily. "Do we have a plan yet?" The leader was looking at him in fear as he held a catatonic Leffia, trying to get her to respond. "She's suffering mind down. If we had her up, I think I have a plan, but we're out of magic potions and dash." He was cut off as Bell took out the rest of his jewel potion and walked over, kneeling down next to the girl and lifting the vial to her mouth and tipped it back. She drunk it up before the light returned to her eyes, and she coughed as she sat up. What happened? Raoul looked at Bell like was a savior sent from above before clearing his throat and beginning quickly, keeping an eye on the rest of the party. "Look, I think we need to take out its magic stone. It'll keep regenerating otherwise. None of our other mags can keep a chant going in a fight while having strong enough magic to destroy it, and we need someone to deliver her to its weak point behind its back, so we need you too. Leffia, use your strongest magic. Bell, fly her around and keep her steady. If we can kill its stone in its chest, I think that'll do the trick. Stick on his back, you'll have the best shot like that." The Goliath raged as it began to take slow, lumbering steps towards them. Leffia gulped until Bell knelt down, allowing her to clamber on. She did so nervously, remembering exactly how belligerent she had been to the boy who was now directly in charge of keeping her alive on what a sane person would call a suicide mission. Raoul gritted his teeth as he shouted, "All right, get going." Bell's wings extended out and Leffia screamed as they were thrust into the air. Hey, slow down." Her response was for Bell to shout back, "Sorry, but we need to stay safe. Start the chant." Leffia gulped, holding on for dear life while also extending out her staff. It was an insanely difficult thing with her on his back, his wings beating quickly to dodge the Goliath's attacks, and it was only when she began to fall after a bad turn when Bell quickly pulled her over his shoulder and into a bridal carry. Leffia wanted to scream at him, punch him, release a spell at him, but she knew that an ignis fatuus at this concentration of magic would be fatal for not just them, but the party below. Bell dove under one of the beast's punches and evaded a sound wave as Leffia finished her chant. They were hovering in the air just behind it, and the elf threw her staff forward as she finished the spell's preparation. Bell had to close his eyes to shield himself from the blast of heat as a giant circle formed just behind the monster's chest before pelting it with massive bolts of fire. As soon as the spell was over, Bell opened his eyes only to see Leffia gritting her teeth, staving off a headache. And no way. The magic stone was still intact, and Bell could even see muscles begin to reform as they hovered there. There was no time to think. This was the last chance they had. Diving forward, Bell threw Leffia into the air as the girl screamed in terror before unsheathing his knife. Raising it up, he heard a soft chime of a bell ring in his mind before a small flip of a page. He was like a streak of light as he stabbed the magic stone and screamed in defiance. Firebolt. The stone cracked as the spell surged through the knife and into the core of it, and with a wrench, he twisted his knife and smiled in visceral satisfaction as it shattered into 1,000 shards. Bell didn't have time to revel in his glory, though, as the monster was already turning to ash and he could see Leffia falling in front of him from where he threw. Jumping off the final fragments of the Goliath before it crumbled into dust, Bell grabbed Leffia in midair and turned them around at the final moment before they hit the wall with a sickening crack. For the boy, everything went black, but for Leffia all she felt were a pair of warm arms around her as the two slid down the wall. They landed with a hard thump, and she opened her eyes nervously only to watch in awe as the Goliath crumbled in front of her. We did it. She turned around, too ecstatic at the nightmare of a fight being over to remember that she was supposed to hate her partner. However, she gasped when she saw the state he was in. His hair was matted with blood from a head wound on the back of his head, and his wings were crushed at the base and were hanging limply. "See, Cranel? Wait. No, come on, wake up." Leffia gripped his shoulders and tried to shake him awake, not eliciting any response as her pleas became more and more desperate. Before she could continue, she was pushed out of the way by a terrified Lily. "Master Bell. Damn it all to hell." The girl pulled a final potion from her leg holster and uncorked it, pushing it to Bell's lips only to realize he wouldn't be able to swallow. Lily didn't let that deter her, though, as she lifted the vial to her lips as Leffia watched with teary eyes. Taking the liquid into her mouth, She held her mouth to Belle's and tilted his head back, ejecting the potion gently while massaging his throat. It was to her great relief when she felt a tiny bobbing of his Adam's apple and retracted, wiping her lips with a healthy blush on her cheeks as she began to sob. "Damn it, Master Belle. Why do you have to do stupid stunts like that? What would happen if you died?" Leffia spoke up, her voice shaky as she looked at the boy that had sacrificed himself for the final play. "I am so sorry. She was cut off as Lily looked up at her with narrowed, hazel eyes. She kept her gaze on the elf for a second before sighing and replying. "Master Belle made the decision, not you. Just be grateful that his is idiotically heroic as he is, or else you'd be the one like this." Leffia shook her head sadly, knowing that wasn't the whole story. "And no, I've been horrible to him. I was just so. I am." Lily gritted her teeth as she snarled back. "Look, elf, I've only got a fraction of Master Belle's patience right now, and you're wearing it thin. If you're actually sorry, say it to him when he's awake and not dying." Leffia nodded silently, still ashamed by her actions. This was the exact kind of behavior that Reveria had chastised her for, and she wondered with a sinking feeling in her stomach what it would be like if AIS ever learned about it. They made their way back over to the party, Belle slung over Lily's shoulders until Raoul ran over and grabbed him from her. "Oh, Loki above. Mage team, get the rock out of the way. We need to get to the safe floor. We can't relax yet. If you've got the strength, collect the drop items and get moving." There was a rush of movement as they set about their tasks, though Lily and Leffia didn't leave Belle's side for 1 second even though Raoul was carrying him. No more monsters spawned from the walls, and within a few minutes, they were down into the safety of the 18th floor. The expedition force breathed a sigh of relief as Raoul called out to the assembled. "We're going to be resting for the night to allow the seriously injured time to heal. Orba, send out the cart to Rivera and tell them what happened. Supporter team, can you erect the tents we have available?" Lily nodded before turning to Leffia with a glare. "Don't leave his side for a second, understood? Once I've set up the tent, take him over to it." Leffia agreed silently, and Lily set about putting up one of the 3 tents they had. It wouldn't be enough for all of them, and they had only been taken to be used as changing rooms for when they arrived at Rivera and possibly a medical tent. Eventually the tents were set up and Leffia took Belle with a heave from Raoul, who nodded to her with a small smile. "I know it wasn't the best fight we've been in, but well done today, Leffia." That made the pit in her stomach deepen even further. She knew that she'd been hit with mind down in the middle of the big fight, even after the boy she'd despised had told her to conserve her energy for the main fight. What's worse, she used said energy to tire him out. She'd compromised the team because she was jealous of Ai's attention, and he nearly died, trying to save her. Taking him over to the tent, she walked in to see Lily setting out a bedroll for him and motioned for her to set him down. Leffia did so before asking nervously, "Do we take his armor off?" Lily looked up at her before sighing in frustration. "I'll handle it. His wings are extremely delicate right now. Get me the bandages from my backpack, and find some long, sturdy sticks." Leffia did so, leaving the tent and returning to see that Lily had bandaged up his headwound and gotten his armor and undershirt off. Lily took the branches and began to splint his wings. Once she was done, Lily sighed and wiped a bead of sweat from her brow before rolling Belle over onto his front. "All right, that should be fine. So, Leffia was it. Can I help you?" The elf gulped before muttering nervously. "Well, I was just wondering if I could help." Lily's eyes narrowed before she crossed her arms and replied. "He'll need a few hours, probably won't wake up until dinner time. He'll need food. If you can help me forage, I'd be grateful." Leffia was surprised and offered nervously. "I've got a healing spell, and we have food." Lily put her finger to her lips with a glare. "You already needed to share a potion with Master Belle for the last spell, no more casting. I'd be grateful if you can cast it when you've rested." The elf nodded nervously until she saw Lily's jealous pout. "Come on, why do you get to share a potion with him?" She tilted her head as Lily said accusingly. "Master Belle had to use half of his dual potion on you when you got mine down, so be grateful." Leffia cottoned on as she whispered indignantly. "I didn't have a choice. And besides, why you did that tea to give him a potion?" Lily blinked in surprise before she grinned dopily at the memory. "I'd like it if he was awake the next time. My first kiss with Master Belle. Kinda romantic though, saving his life with a kiss. Riaz is going to be so jealous." Leffia was surprised that Lily didn't seem bothered by the fact as they left the tent. What? Why you can just do that. What about Miss Wallenstein?" Lily laughed as she replied, setting her backpack down just outside the tent as she replied. I'm not too worried about her. I know Master Bell has room in his heart for every girl in Ororio, though he can be pretty dense at times. Anyways, can you take me to those hot springs? The elf nodded, wondering exactly who this Bell Cranel was. She had just assumed he was some lecher that had seduced AIS through some trickery, and that was why Loki had endorsed messing with him, but the way this devil supporter was talking about him made her wonder if that was entirely right. Eventually they reached the springs and Lily gasped in excitement as Lefia giggled at her reaction. I know, they are amazing. Do you want to get in? Lily had already shed her clothes and dove into the pool, staying submerged for a moment before resurfacing with a pleasurable sigh. It's been showers for so long, finally a bath. Lefia joined her soon after, though she made sure to fold her clothes neatly before sinking into the water. She could already feel the stress from the fight seeping away as she sighed in delight. We have baths at Twilight Manor, but these are in a class of their own. She watched curiously as Lily sat up on a rock and extended her wing in front of her and she began to wash it down. Eventually she blurted out curiously, what do wings feel like? Lily blinked in surprise before replying, continuing to bathe the black skin as she mused. Well, they're kind of like legs. Flying is kind of like running. It's why Master Bell is so quick in the air. They can be a pain to wash, and we need special clothes to let them be free. But I love my wings a lot. It's proof that I'm a devil, that I'm a new person. Lefia nodded before explaining apologetically. Sorry, it's just that Miss Wallenstein told me that his was sensitive and I was just. Sorry. Lily laughed at her before grinning and noting. You're a lot like Master Bell, too nervous. Don't worry, I know that he's got a crush on her. Lefia's eyes widened as she asked in shock. But, that must be horrible. And no offense, but Miss Wallenstein is very pretty. To her surprise Lily scoffed and raised an eyebrow. Master Bell is getting married in 4 months to a Gremory and we're said devil's servants. If I'm honest, the marriage lets me compete, even if I can never have him all to myself. Lefia was burning up in embarrassment at the idea as she shouted like the girl was insane. But what about marriage? Dates. T2 souls being forever together in harmony. Miss Wallenstein would never join a HHH harem. Right. Lily snorted before she replied with a grin. It isn't as if Master Bell would force her, as if he could. If she wants to join in, and Master Bell loves her, then she's welcome. The elf thought it over with a rolling stomach. While everything was screaming at her to say that her pure Miss Wallenstein wouldn't do something like join a harem, it wasn't long ago when she thought that she would return after a night of drinking while muttering something about bunnies. But, if she joins, Lily giggled and offered, squirting water up at her with her hands. You could also join, you know. I doubt Master Bell could say no to a pretty elf. Maybe you and this Miss Wallenstein could share him one night. Lefia shouted indignantly as she fired back her own stream of water. They continued to play around in the water as more and more girls from the expedition joined them, enjoying the water until the crystals in the ceiling began to dim and Lefia explained, sitting up on the grass to dry off. That's night, we should get ready to go back. As they walked through the forest back towards the makeshift camp, the light from the crystals finishing its dimming, they arrived to see that a large bonfire had been made. Raoul was sitting with Belle as the boy laughed along at some joke. It seemed as if Belle's help in the last fight had ingratiated himself with the men of the Loki familia, and Lily smiled, knowing that he didn't exactly have many other boys to talk to. Walking over, there was a sudden cheer as the rest of the familia caught sight of Lefia, and the girl seized up in shock. Belle caught sight of them and gave them a large grin and a wave. They walked over and Lefia felt particularly nervous as the cheers continued to sound out, though she was surprised when Belle was suddenly shoved towards her and forced to sit down next to her. His wings were still splintered, and his head was still bandaged, but that was more than any human would be able to claim after his injuries. Lefia, Lily. Suddenly Raoul stood up, a tankard in his hand that he raised in a toast. To the heroes of this expedition, the killers of the Black Goliath, Belle and Lefia. The rest of the expedition raised their tankards in turn and called out their agreements, and Lefia was surprised when Belle looked just as nervous as she did. They were fed and watered until they were stuffed, and at some point, Belle had been dragged off by some of the other guys towards the hot springs. Lefia was content to just set out a blanket, bundle up, and go to bed, but both Lily and a few members of her familia seemed to have other plans. Walking over to them, she asked in a slightly wary voice, "What are you all planning? Shouldn't we be getting to sleep?" Lily giggled impishly as she folded her arms, her face conspiratorial as she replied invitingly, We're gonna go peek on the boys. Want to come with? Leffia gaped in surprise as she exclaimed in horror and an undercurrent of interest. What? That's so inappropriate. I can't let you go. It's a complete invasion of Belle's privacy and dash. She grabbed her mouth the moment she realized what she'd said as the rest of the girls giggled. Lily sighed and shook her head sadly. Leffia, you don't understand. Peeking is a girl's romance. Romance, I tell you. The cheer of romance arose from the group, and the elf found herself getting swept along into a new world of lechery, though she was wondering exactly what lay behind that silver armor. To be continued. Hope you enjoyed and look forwards to more. As usual, questions and ideas are welcome through reviews and PMS. Please drop by the archive and comment to let the creator know if you enjoyed their work.